and welcome to another small screen Star Wars. As always, I am Julian Mush. I am joined by Rachel Wilkinson,
Hello.
and we're going to be talking about Star Wars, The Mandalorian, Chapter 19, The Convert, that's Season 3, Episode 3. We're also going to be talking about The Bad Batch, Season 2, Episode 13. Lots of threes in the mix today. That's my takeaway. We're going to be following the same format we have for the last 2 weeks, which is starting with Mando, and there's a reason for that. More people watch Mando than watch Bad Batch. But to those who don't watch The Bad Batch, I just want you to know you are missing out. It is good stuff. So we'll be interested to see what people think about this week's episode, though. But we'll get to that. Before we get into the whole breakdown, so we're going to break this down scene by scene for each show and kind of give our overall thoughts. Full spoilers for everything Star Wars starting now, basically. What can I spoil someone with? Vader dies. No, that's too easy. Luke is fun. No, that's not it. Anyway. Let's do some housekeeping. So, a couple things. First of all, of course, if you want to join our conversation and be a part of the show, you can do that. You can head over to Twitch or YouTube and subscribe to us there to get notifications when we go live. We record this show every Thursday night, around 7:38 Central Time. And that sometimes changes. It from time to time can change, which is why you're going to want to subscribe so you know when we go live. And then, of course, you can jump in the chat. I have the chat window up here, and we get into it because there's a lot of fun stuff. Last week was fun. We had a lot of fun banter going on the show last week.
We
encourage you to come around and join that. We also have a way to support the show. So if you've been listening to this and you're like, wow, this is some fun stuff. Can't believe how good this stuff is. Wish I could give them my money. Well, I have a solution for you. We have a Patreon, and that's over at patreon.com/TowerBabbleCast, BABBLE. And for as little as $5 a month, you get access to our monthly film club. That's some bonus content for your trouble. We are late, at this point, very late. For the February edition of the film club, which is Jackie Brown. We're hoping to record it this weekend. That is the plan, so hopefully that follows through. And then, of course, we'll have another for end of March. If $5 is too rich for your blood, I understand. Coffee's getting expensive. We used to say, for the price of a cup of coffee, you could help, save a child from starvation or whatever it was. Well, coffee now costs $10 a cup. So I'm not expecting anyone to spend that much money on us. So for as little as $2.50, how much coffee used to cost, you can get access to our Discord. Now, of course, that's a perk that's available at the $5 level as well, but we have a lovely community hanging out on the Tower Babble Discord and engaging in fun conversations. And including, we got a little bit of stuff around the Oscars. I did a bonus episode for the Oscars. I did a solo show. That's always a little awkward. But hey, if you've been listening to Small Screen Star Wars long enough, you know that the very first episode of Small Screen Star Wars actually started with a solo episode. So
it was, yeah.
So
I couldn't let that go on though, because I was like, no, someone needs to counter you.
Right, because otherwise I'm always right. And
otherwise you're just yelling into the void by yourself, and that doesn't work. I
assume that's happening anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that's Patreon. $5 or $2.50, whatever is most comfortable for you. And while we're talking about Patreon, we have a special announcement, which is, of course, we have a new patron who joined after last week's show, and that is Andrew, and joined at the $5 level. So thank you, Andrew, for doing so.
Cool.
And I hope you stick around for a long, long time, and not just because you're spending $5 a month, but because I hope you like the content. So
yeah, thanks,
Andrew. That's the goal. Hope he's back for this. It's unclear if he was the one who was chatting with us in the chat last week. It feels like it is, but maybe it's just a coincidence. So hopefully he's back this week to hang out and talk a bit of Star Wars with us. All right. I think that basically covers it. Oh, yeah, the website, towerbabble.ca. as well as you can email us or send us comments and questions if you're not a part of the Discord to towerbabblepodcast@gmail.com. All right. Let's talk about Star Wars because there's a lot to cover. So, again, we're talking about The Mandalorian, Chapter 19, The Convert, Season 3, Episode 3. The logline is, on Coruscant, former Imperials find amnesty in the New Republic, which is funny because that is true, but also not the entire episode. So that's interesting.
Right, yeah.
This is directed by Lee Isaac Chung and written by Noah Kluwer, Jon Favreau, and of course stars Pedro Pascal, Katie Sackhoff, Omid Abtahi. I think that's how you say his name. That's who plays Dr. Pershing, as well as someone you might have recognized from a recent movie in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumanium, Katie M. O'Brien playing Elia Kane. I got some thoughts about her this week. Of course, Emily Swallow's back as the armor, and we have a bunch of other kind of smaller roles. But a little bit of a wider cast this week, and that's always fun. It just feels like sometimes with these shows, especially the Bad Batch, and where it's like half the cast is played by one person.
Yeah,
it can feel like you're just hanging out with like 4 people all the time. And it's nice to kind of expand the scope a little bit. So that is fun. Now, before we get into the scene-by-scene breakdown, I'm going to ask you, Rachel, what you thought of this episode overall.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I mean, overall, I liked it. It gave me kind of Andor vibes.
Oh,
I think a lot of people were saying that.
But like people were saying that for some reason in a bad way, and I don't understand that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny because it was kind of like, I don't know, not the opposite of Andor, but like the opposite of the content of Andor, almost. You know what I mean? So instead of ISB, we've got like the New Republic, and you kind of get to see.
Mirror image.
Yeah, it's like a mirror image of like how they both kind of dealt with things like very differently. So I don't know. I thought it was a very like interesting episode. I did find it a little bit just odd. Like I guess maybe the pacing of the episode, how it was like we got the cool Bo-Katan like Mando content, and then this really long stretch of
intermission almost
of content in the middle, and then we go back to Bo-Katan and Mando at the end, which I thought was kind of interesting. But yeah, no, overall I enjoyed the episode. I like a nice long episode.
Yeah, and this is long. This comes in at 56 minutes.
Yeah,
which I think is the longest episode of Mando we've had in a while.
I think ever.
It might be the longest ever. You're right. And it's wild that that's the case because I also prefer a meteor. This is like something just a little bit meteor. Now, this is meteor, but it's not in the way that you would think. I mean, the way, last week's episode of The Mandalorian was great for a lore and world building, and I thought did a great job of that in the kind of narrow scope of being on Mandalore basically the entire time. And that's awesome because we hadn't been there forever. We had never been there in live action, and there's all sorts of things that we get to learn and explore. And obviously the whole Mythosaur stuff is exciting, although left to dangle this week, I think. Largely. This week, though, feels like a different show. And you mentioned like these strong Andor vibes. I think that's totally fair because what Andor did well was character work. And this episode's all character work.
Oh, it's basically tons, yeah.
So that's great. I'm a big fan of that. Obviously, we go back to Coruscant, and it feels much more alive than we've seen it, probably since the prequels. And that's really fun as well. And we'll get into all that stuff. But I largely enjoyed the episode. I thought the structure, although maybe a little clunky in the sense of like, okay, we're going to bookend the episode with the Mando stuff because it is called The Mandalorian. And then we're gonna put this kind of political intrigue element in the middle. I just don't know how else you would do it, right? Like, if you're going to transition to this other story that the showrunners feel like is important, then you'd probably look for a more seamless kind of segue than they use. But I mean, I don't know what else you'd do.
But like, I'm also happy that this was one episode and they didn't like chop this up into 2 or something. Because I feel like when we get such few episodes for Mando,
that's true.
You don't want to I don't want to waste an entire.
Especially coming in at 35 minutes or whatever.
Yeah,
episode 1
like
was,
I wouldn't have wanted to waste an entire episode on like just the the Coruscant.
Well, at least not. I mean, so what's interesting is that apparently So remember Rangers of the New Republic, the show that was going to star what's her name? Not Ronda Rousey. The you know what I'm talking about.
The one who blocked me on Twitter?
Wait, she blocked you on Twitter?
Yes.
Oh, really? Why?
Gina Carano?
Gina Carano, thank you.
Because I liked somebody else's tweet that was like a trolly, really stupid tweet, and all it was a picture of Max Rebo's butt, and it just said something like Gino Carano likes poopy butts or something. And I liked that tweet, and that girl got blocked, and then everyone, we were laughing about her getting blocked. And then I was like, oh, that's so funny. I just tweeted something along the lines of like, I want to be in this blocked club so bad, and then I also got blocked.
Well, sour grapes, I suppose. But
it was really funny. But it's my best Twitter story.
Well, it's a good Twitter story.
Yeah. But yes. Oh yeah. So yeah, that's not the Squadrons one, is it?
So it was. We didn't really know exactly what it was going to be, but she was going to get her own spin-off show, right?
That would have been dumb. Like, put everything else aside of like all her other whatever real life bullshit. Even with that aside, she wasn't a good enough. Like, I'm sorry, but like the character was fine, her acting was fine, but it wasn't enough to hold its own show.
Carry a whole show.
Yeah, like for her entire show. Like, come on, I don't want to watch that. That sounds boring.
Well, I think what's interesting is that they've apparently reworked some of that stuff that they wanted to tell in that show, and they're putting it into The Mandalorian.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's where this stuff kind of comes into play, right? This kind of exploring the New Republic from the ground level, kind of how Andor explored the Empire from that ground level.
Yeah. Okay.
And kind of understanding, giving us a better understanding of why the New Republic failed. We know almost nothing about the New Republic. Everything that we know about the New Republic is from one book, Bloodlines, essentially, right? Which is it's a pretty good book. It's about Leia kind of navigating the political landscape of the New Republic as it's kind of splintering a little bit. And it's quite good, but, you know, it's most people, I would say, haven't read it.
I have not, to be honest.
99% of people who are watching The Mandalorian do not know anything about that book, nor will they ever read it. So how can we get some of these learnings about, hey, what were the failings of the New Republic into canon in a way that people will find interesting? Now, whether you find it interesting is up to you. That's in the eye of the beholder. But for me, I was interested. I was intrigued by the workings here. So I liked this episode. That's long story short.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Me too. Like, I found it very, very interesting, and like the different, just the polarizing kind of different themes that you get from this, as opposed to like Andor and what the Empire was doing when they were starting up versus what the New Republic is doing when they kind of take over. So I found those kind of correlations really interesting, and even just kind of funny. Like, a lot of the little things I noted were just kind of cracked me up about the differences between how they're running things.
We'll get into that for sure. So that brings us to our new weekly segment, which is, of course, IMDb reviews. So this is the featured review on the Chapter 19 page, IMDb page, but from Moritz Hertz. Moritz Hertz. A lot of Z's in there. Gave it a 6 out of 10. It's obviously not great. And I just skipping to the very last paragraph here, which is 6 out of 10 is very generous considering the weird, poorly written, disastrous intermezzo on Coruscant. Now, intermezzo is just a fancy, I think, Italian way of saying intermission. So that's kind of what we called it.
Poorly written.
I didn't find that it was poorly written or disastrous.
Neither.
So, I mean, let's find out why he thinks that. Or
teach their own. But yeah.
Okay. After 2 rather weak episodes, the third one is not the big banger we hoped it would be. I'm already mad. First of all, last week was fine. First of all, and then we could argue about the first episode of season 3. I think there's valid arguments to be made that episode was problematic in a lot of ways. But we're not talking about that, and nor is it the third episode guaranteed to be a big banger for the record.
How is seeing a fucking mythosaur weak? That just doesn't work for me.
All right, well, let's continue. Instead, it turns away from the main storyline, which could have been working, but it did not. The story is just boring and makes no sense. After finishing the last episode in the first 10 minutes, they turn away from Mando and focus on the scientists we know from earlier episodes. I personally like to see him again, but I have to admit that it is nothing that overwhelms me. Seeing Coruscant again was more surprising and fascinating than the story's episode itself. And then there is this random idiotic plot twist I want to forget quickly. That was writing... okay, sorry. That was writing from a 4-year-old. The episode shows the New Republic being not any better than the Empire, which is catastrophic and speaks against everything the franchise established. Does it though?
Like,
I don't know if that's true.
How does it show them being worse?
Well, it's the same. I could argue that they're just as bad, maybe from a bureaucratic standpoint, but you also have, it's also can't be against everything the franchise established, because the sequels, which this person probably doesn't like either, does establish that the New Republic fails.
Yeah.
Right? And they talk about some of those things in this episode. We'll get to those things. So,
but I mean, like, it's, I don't know. It's not like they're locking people in prison for extra long sentences so they can build a Death Star.
Yes,
it's like people are just like hanging out, having a good time. There's like a festival and like what?
Right. Well, they do have to. They don't have a. They have a robo counselor, so that's not great, and stuff. We'll get into it. Okay. So they finish this piece by saying, "Oh God, I was glad that they turned back to Mando at the end of the episode." 3 exclamation marks on that. So, if they will not turn the ship into the right direction quickly, this show could become very fast and very bad. I think they meant that the other way around.
Yes, yeah.
I've heard that the views of this season premiere were more than underwhelming, and I can understand that even as a hardcore Star Wars fan. And that is a trend going on for quite a long time. It seems that this show has to save Disney Plus. I don't know if that's true. It is their only hope. Okay, I see what they did there. Clever, but I don't agree. It has to get much better than this to do that. Overall, the episode felt like a drawback. The first 10 minutes were just the end of last week's episode, and I can understand why they did not finish it last week. I cannot understand why they didn't finish it last week. I know why they didn't finish it last week, because ending on that big reveal of the Mythosaur is badass.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's pretty obvious to me, but teach their own. So let's hope that they find themselves quickly, because this is not the way. Oh, look, they did it again. All right, so this is what I mean. I have seen some backlash against this episode of being kind of like, hey, we're here to see Din and Grogu. What is this Dr. Pershing bullshit? I don't care about this stuff.
Right, yeah.
And to them, I say, shove it, because it's good stuff. It's not written by a 4-year-old. It's well directed. It's well executed. And I think it pays a nice homage to Star Wars Episode 3. And we'll get into all those things in just a moment. All right. Let's get into it. So, again, Chapter 19, The Convert. Any thoughts on the title here? This is the first time we've had a compelling title in a while.
Okay, wait. Is it... No, I thought it was the... Is it The Convert?
Are you thinking Pabu?
No, I read it wrong. I think I read it as covet, like the covet. Like I was reading it as like a Mandalorian covet, not a convert.
Well, yeah. So they have the covert, which is where they hide out at the end of this episode.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was thinking.
Convert, is pretty close. You only have to remove one letter.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I I mean, obviously, it's just kind of. It is what it is about. There's obviously 2 different reasons,
right,
for this, or multiple different characters that this is based on.
Who's it applying to?
Well, it's the Dr. Pershing for sure, and then
and Dr. Pershing at the beginning of the episode is a convert from the Empire to the New Republic.
To the Republic. Same thing with what's her name there? The other.
Oh yeah.
But she's kind of like
Elia Kane.
Gray area.
I think she's a double agent or a triple agent or whatever.
And then Bo-Katan as well, which was a really cool part of this episode.
Yes, and Bo-Katan, which this is the one thing. So we talked about this for so long, which is Mando, he met Bo-Katan in season 2, and those are Mandalorians who took their helmet off, and yada yada yada. And we're like, how long is it going to be until Mando kind of figures out that it's not about whether you have your helmet on or not. There's other things that are more important, yada yada. And we thought, well, maybe he spends more time with Bo-Katan and joins her cause. Maybe that will help convince him. Now, the twist that I was not expecting was that it would be the other way around.
No, me neither. I would never think that this would happen. Like
right.
that was like a cute, and I was like, oh, that's cool, but I understand why.
It makes sense.
I don't necessarily think she will stay forever. I don't know.
I don't know either, and I think that there will be some
conflictions.
Some conflictions. That's a good way to put it. And but yeah, I think she's been looking for somewhere. Like she doesn't have anywhere to belong.
No,
like she's sitting on that throne by herself, like a loser.
Well, yeah, and like it's like the other Mandalorians that were following her just
abandoned her,
abandoned her, don't give a shit, and then she finds this, but she's brought into this group like immediately open arms,
right.
Like so it was it was
on
quite
a technicality, which is funny.
Yeah, right.
Right.
But she's just kind of like, but I think to her is also surprising, being like they're just gonna accept me, like out of like that's kind of interesting, right? But
anyway, there's lots of angles to that. I think we'll get to it as we get into it.
Yeah.
All right. So on the previously on, we saw Dr. Pershing. We saw the very first episode of The Mandalorian, which is nice. We got reintroduced to Elia Kane as the comms officer. The first time we saw her on the Star Destroyer from season 2, and then we also got a reminder about the rules of redemption, the living waters, etc., etc. And then we saw the Mythosaur from last week again. So just to really tee everything up. So we pick up right where we left off last week, as that IMDb review so eloquently mentioned, at the Mines of Mandalore. And I always like it when you pick up right after, because it's like if you're ending on such a kind of a big moment, it's nice to kind of just understand exactly what's happening at that exact moment. You know,
for sure.
After, like, I want to know how they decompress from that, right? So we learned a couple things. We learned that Din did not see, he was knocked out, or he didn't see anything. It was too dark, etc., for him to see anything. And then I guess was drowned already by the time that Bo-Katan found him. And that obviously that Bo has chosen to keep the knowledge of the Mythosaur to herself.
Yeah, very interesting.
Why do you think she's doing that?
I don't know. See, like, so this is the only part where I'm like kind of confused about this episode. Where I'm like, okay, so like nothing dragged him in. He just sunk.
Uh-huh.
But then like, why was he unconscious if he just sunk?
By the way, we talked about, I said for sure last week that he was pulled in.
Yeah.
But no, he fell off that staircase, and that's hilarious.
Like,
it's really funny.
But have you ever done that, like in
like a pool?
Not a pool. But like, have you ever done that like accidentally? Like, you can do that when you're like traveling, if you're like in the ocean, where it's like you're walking on like a sandbar, and then all of a sudden it's like doof, and it like you just like you go in. But I feel like you're not going to sink as far as he did. But like,
he's wearing his armor though.
I know he's wearing his armor, so I was like, oh, okay, I guess he just like maybe sunk and gasped, and like that's why he was unconscious or whatever, or maybe hit his head. I don't know. I know he was already pretty weak too from the creepy
or he
spider
hadn't pressurized his helmet
fight.
Or something like that, maybe.
But,
perhaps.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, I guess he just sunk. That's weird. I definitely thought he got more like pulled in than that. But yeah, her not telling him about the Mythosaur was like wild to me. I was like, oh shit, she's just not going to tell him. I wonder why. Like, I don't know.
Well, she was reading that whole thing about the Mythosaur plaque before, and that's just moments before, right? If you think about it, it was last week. But she's, we talked about this last week, because she's kind of had this moment of this come to Jesus moment a little bit. She was kind of witnessing, having this little bit of a reinvigoration with the old texts, as it were, And so she sees this Mythosaur, and it's kind of this like, it'd be like seeing a burning bush or something, from the Bible.
Yes, right.
So it would be this kind of like this sign from God, basically, that, oh shit, this is real. So
this is real, yeah. I did like that she brought up that it was like seismic activity from the bombings, that like it didn't used to be that deep there, which is cool. So it's like, so what, did the Mythosaur like crawl out of the earth?
It like, lived, yeah. It's like, have you seen Godzilla versus Kong?
No.
It's in that movie. They're in the center of the earth. That's where all the Kongs live, and the other kaiju. So
okay,
I assume that's what it's like. At the center of Mandalore, that's where all the Mythosaurs live.
That's kind of cool.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's not that cool. In the movie, it's not that cool. Trust me. But it's silly, actually. It makes no sense. There's like a sun down there.
Huh.
I guess it's the core.
And I was like, I don't know. Maybe there was just like a mythosaur egg down there or something that got released. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
I mean, sure.
wild.
I mean, it's huge though, so it feels like it's been around a long time.
Yeah, it's
right?
massive. Or whatever it was awakened, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, no, I was like super surprised that she didn't tell him, that she just kind of immediately, like, she probed him a little bit, being like, you didn't see anything alive.
Well, I think that she had like nothing, which is like, if I was man, I'd be like, that's a very specific question.
Yeah, I'd be like,
you
did
know?
you see something that was alive?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. So I
terrible
think
at communicating, Mando.
well, that's true. He's been bad at that for a long time, and actually, so is she. She's been bad at communicating things. Like, oh, you don't, when she's like, hey, confront Moff Gideon, but don't, or whatever. She says, like, go rescue Grogu, but don't confront Moff Gideon, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't tell him why, right? And then he ends up with a Darksaber, and she's like, oh, fuck. You weren't supposed to do that. I was supposed to get that, you know? And then she's all, pissy about it. So, I feel like it's just like, if you just did a better job communicating, this wouldn't have been a problem. And now she's kind of doing this thing where, okay, well, he already has the Darksaber, and if he comes back to this covert saying he saw a mythosaur, it's kind of like he's kind of like adding all these check boxes to the, hey, I should be the ruler of Mandalore box,
right? So maybe she's gonna go back and try and tame the mythosaur by herself.
I think that's
smart.
All she wants more than anything is to rule Mandalore, right?
Yes, of course.
And because of that, it means that she's not. We always talk about the reluctant leader idea, right?
Yeah.
And this concept of like I don't want to. The people who are best at leading are the ones who generally don't want to lead.
Right.
And someone who wants to lead typically has that motivation for the wrong reasons, right?
Yeah.
And with Bo-Katan, it's a little bit of both, but I think when you are striving so hard to be the leader at all costs, I think you kind of lose sight of the good, what you're trying to actually achieve, and why, who the people you're trying to actually help. So Din is one of those people, and I think it's setting up this moment later in the season where she's going to betray him for her own purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, she should probably have the Darksaber because she's obviously better with it than Din is, but maybe she should just teach Din how to use it.
Yeah, maybe they could rule together, because I mean, everyone's shipping them now as mom and dad Mandalore. So
sure, it was funny. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they're like, "Well, that can't work because he already has a boyfriend, and that's what's his name on Tatooine."
Oh, like, wait, are you talking about
yeah,
what's his
the
name?
sheriff.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that guy's name?
Oh my god, it's
Timothy Oliphant, that guy.
Yes, yeah. Why I don't know. I can't think of it.
Anyway,
my
him.
brain is broken. Yeah, that's really funny. But it did. I won't lie. That whole like shipping thing and being like, oh, she's I saw some people on Twitter being like, she's Mama Lore. I'm like, can she not just be a strong badass woman? Do we immediately have to be like, oh, a female character is mom now? Like, I don't know.
Well, when there's a kid involved, it's kind of like,
but like, just, I don't know, let her be her own thing without immediately trying to make her like ship her into a relationship.
Sure,
or, like,
and I feel
make
that.
her a mother figure is kind of annoying to me.
I feel that. And except at the same time, I think at the end of the day, if after 2 seasons they do end up together and ruling together, it's like, it's actually not that bad. It could be worse. No. There's worse things. I think the long-term thing here is that Grogu becomes the leader of the Mandalorians and is both a Jedi and a Mandalorian.
He is going to tame the mythosaur, actually,
and probably right. And then that is kind of like, and then will be the leader of the Mandalorians, keep them united for thousands of years, or however, 1,000 years, however long Yoda's lived for, right?
Yeah.
As good as I look, you will not be when you are 900 years old, or whatever he says.
Yeah.
So, all right. That's just the first little bit here, so we got lots to cover still. So Din says he's redeemed, and Bo says that she witnessed it. So, okay, good. And she's like, can we get the hell out of here? Before they leave, Din grabs a little bit of proof, a little vial of water. I thought, there better be something special about this water, because otherwise I don't know how this is going to prove anything.
I assumed that there would be, like, they call it the living waters for a reason. I assumed there was, like, some way of knowing that it is from there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we find out later that that's what she uses to like temper her Beskar forging or whatever, but it's interesting anyway. So they take off in her ship. There's this as they take off. There's this really cool engine like burst sound that mixes really well with the score. And it's like very traditional Star Wars, and I loved it. It's like classic right of a movie, like John Williams style. Loved that. Din and Bo then have a conversation about having a feast at her castle, but she makes a joke about how that wouldn't work if he's not going to take his helmet off again. Before they're able to kind of continue that conversation, they're interrupted by a squad of TIE interceptors. Now, of course, the TIE interceptor is kind of that next evolution of the TIE fighter with the more pointy triangular wings.
Yeah,
very
spikier.
Cool design. Yeah,
they're so cool looking. Yeah,
they're have really aggressive design. And first time we saw them in our timeline, the human timeline, was in Return of the Jedi. The Star Wars timeline, the first time that they appear is in an episode of Rebels. And big fan of the TIE interceptors. They're faster, more have a little bit more firepower than a regular TIE fighter, but still don't have shield and still don't have a hyperdrive.
Yeah.
Unlike what was the TIE design that
Defenders? No,
there's the Defender.
Yeah, there's the interceptors. There's TIE bombers, which we see later in this episode, and then I think it was the TIE Defender that Thrawn was trying to create.
Program,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And the money
those
was
were the ones
to
that
the Star Destroyer.
Yeah, that had like heavy cannons and shields
and a hyperdrive.
Hyperdrive, yeah.
And the money was diverted instead from that program to the Death Star. Ultimately, the speculation always has been that if they had just invested in the TIE Defenders, the Rebels probably wouldn't have been able to win. So
no.
Interesting little side bit there. So anyway, so we got some TIE interceptors here, and they wonder where they came from. There's a little bit of back and forth about how Bo has kind of made some enemies with different Imperial warlords. This is interesting for those who may not be aware. During this time, there is Moff Gideon, by the way, would have qualified as an Imperial warlord at the time. But there was different segments of the galaxy that were kind of subdivided. When the Empire fell and when the Emperor was killed, a lot of those local systems were still being controlled by the local Imperial presence, right? So the Moff of that system would just take control independently, right? And there was a little bit of work between the different groups, and some of them came together, and that's kind of where the Battle of Jakku thing happens. Others are taken out independently, and some others are hunted down by the New Republic, etc. But what Bo is saying is that she's made some enemies with these different warlords by hijacking their ships.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is funny. She says she scuffed some Imperial warlords, which is a great word, scuffed, which I'm pretty sure she said before. She's used that like slang before in Clone Wars and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's like one of those Star Wars kind of like, Ezra calls them she scurfed off or something like that, or scuffed off.
Yeah.
It's like, Star Wars version of pissed off or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. So the plan that they jump into action, the plan is to get Din back to his ship so he can reinforce them with the N1. He has to jump on the gunner seat, and we get some kind of... I love the interior design of her ship. I love the kind of the systems and the controls all look very modern and cool with this kind of retro feel to them. Din ultimately drops from Bo's ship. He just like jumped. They're like, okay, we're gonna. I can't slow down for the drop, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. So they head back to her castle, and as they fly over it, this is kind of like Captain America in Captain America: The First Avenger, where he's like, you forgot your parachute. He's like, I don't need a parachute, and jumps out of the plane. It's like really cool. So this is just like that, and so he jumps out of the thing and then uses his jetpack to like land. Could do a little bit of a smoother landing, but
I like that they didn't give him a super smooth landing. I like that his landing was a little clumsy.
I want a superhero landing. Come on. You know?
Not everyone can be Ahsoka Tano, where she jumps off of a ship going down in the air and then can land on a platform.
Oh, you're talking about the Siege of Mandalore? That is a cool scene.
Yeah. It's the sickest.
It's a little bit too sick, but all right.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So So he drops from the ship and separates himself from Grogu. Grogu is like barely in this episode, which is interesting. I love how Grogu like he like seals himself in his little pod.
Yeah. So cute.
Yeah. So he has to rush to his ship before this like other TIE can take. He's like trying to take out the ship before he can get into it. I thought that was really cool. I also loved how when he dropped out of Bo's ship, the other TIE interceptors like flew past him.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
And I thought that just like really was. This is like next level quality dogfighting.
Yeah.
I think we complained a little bit that there wasn't enough space combat. This doesn't all take place in space, but
starts in space.
It starts in space. So,
yeah.
But either way, it's awesome. I loved it. No notes. It's great.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I especially loved like there's a lot of like put the camera on the ship and make it feel like it's happening for real, like very visceral filmmaking. Yeah. And obviously they use the volume for a lot of this stuff, and one of the ways that you can really use the volume in an exciting way is to make it look like your ship is moving. If you have like the cockpit, a real world cockpit, you can put people in it and then fly kind of the background past the window, and you get all these cool reflections and stuff. So when you merge those with CG to kind of create this exterior shot, it really looks amazing. So I thought it was really awesome. The moves they pull off are cool. Love watching TIE fighters get exploded. Can't see that enough. Of course. So once Din gets in his ship, we kind of get this like dual dogfight scenario happens. He does this like super like high climb stall maneuver.
Oh, I love
it. Doesn't really make sense, but sure.
That's a move we see Hera do in Rebels a few times too.
Yes.
It's like I don't know if that's like a callback to that or not, but like I like these moves where they like go up and stall their plane and then flip backwards.
Yes.
I don't know. I like it.
In the real world, that works because your wings stop working if you try to go straight up into the air. Right. But in Star Wars, I don't really get it because those ships can fly in any direction. So I guess he just turns his engine off.
I think he cuts his engines and and then kind of
Okay. It's still a very cool move. And he uses that to like flip around and take out the one TIE fighter that's chasing him, and then they kind of work together from there. Meanwhile, Bo is using kind of the canyons that she grew up with to kind of keep the TIE fighters off of her, the interceptors off of her. I love that we see that R5 is still very scared.
Yeah, he's just clunking around, falling over.
Yeah. And so I'm a big fan of R5 now. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite droids.
Yeah.
And
just a little scaredy cat.
I also love how Bo is like, "Don't worry, like I'm used to this. Like this is normal." And then she still scratches the side, her wing on the can. She's like, maybe it's been a little while." I also, by the way, didn't mention Mando uses like a missile to take out the TIE interceptor that he does after the stall maneuver. I feel like you see mostly like blaster bolts more often, but the missiles are cool. So I thought that was a nice touch. So Bo has to take out a lot of TIEs on her own. One of the ways that she does it is this cool J turn.
Oh, is that where
drops
the one side? Oh, that was so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. She drops the one side and does this side spin, takes the one out, and then drops into a 0G drop, which is also very cool.
Yeah.
When we see R5 like floating in the air.
Yeah. I love those Mandalorian ships. I think they're really, really like they have such a cool design.
Really? I never really liked them
cool.
that much.
Really? Especially seeing them like, I don't know, like not that it's real life, but seeing
in
them
live
like
action.
in live action, right? It's really cool seeing the maneuvers that they can do and the different like I wasn't expecting that ship to be able to do that move in particular, where she just puts like the one wing up and then it like flips her around. Like it was just I
was
don't know.
surprised. It's a cool move. There's no denying it.
When I saw that, I was like, "Wow, cool!"
The ships it looks especially dumb parked. I think that's maybe where I like with the wings up and like the little pod in the middle. I think when you called it a dink ship, or I think what you called it at one point. Maybe I called it that.
Oh, I don't remember that, but
maybe I called it that. Maybe Kara called it that. I don't remember. But either way, I think it looks silly parked. Maybe that like landed. But a lot of the Star Wars ships kind of look silly parked. So the Marauder kind of looks silly parked too. So
yeah.
Okay. Moving on. They think they're safe. There's this kind of like moment of mutual respect that they get for each other. Kind of like nice shooting, Tex.
Yeah.
And I think that's nice. This little bonding moment. There's this kind of like, you get hit. He's like, not a scratch,
Yeah.
which I do love. And then they catch something on their scope, and it's Thai bombers, which
Yeah.
have made a bombing run on her castle.
Yeah.
So interesting. I guess the idea here is that if she hadn't come to save Din, she would be dead because her castle would have been bombed and destroyed.
Yeah, most likely.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's an interesting. So technically, she kind of owes him her life a little bit. And so she calls them mud scuffers. I think,
Yes.
which is also funny. More Star Wars slang. I could use a lot of that. And she's pissed. Obviously, it's her home, so she chases them down. She destroys one of them, but Din spots another whole platoon, squadron of interceptors approaching. Yeah, like 20 of them, and urges her to turn around. It convinces her to do so, and they take off. They mentioned that that's a lot of ships for an Imperial warlord, which is true.
Yeah,
so what do you make of that? Where do you think these ships came from? They asked that at the beginning of the
and
scene.
that's the other thing. It's like, okay, like they don't, like, you got to have a capital ship basically for those to come out of, right? So we didn't get to really see one. And I mean, it could be on the other side of the planet or wherever else, but yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, that's way too many ties for just like a whatever regular scrapped leftover warlord to have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's obviously very personal. But yeah, I don't know. I think they're obviously setting up some kind of big bad.
Well, there's two things that are potential here, right? One of them is that it's Gideon. Gideon gets mentioned in this episode.
He does.
Quote unquote escaped on his way to the tribunal, or he was fed to a mind flayer or whatever.
Mind flayer, yeah.
But we don't know. We just don't know what's real about that. We don't know the truth of that.
Exactly.
There's also possible, but the other thing that lends credence to that is that, of course, Gideon would have reason to have a personal vendetta against Bo.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece. I think that's more likely, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
But the other potential, I guess, villain that this could be is Thrawn, right? It could be.
Okay.
It could be Grand Admiral Thrawn coming back, making his presence known, and that we haven't looped it into the whole Ahsoka thing yet. But that's coming later.
Could be. But then, why would he have a vendetta against Bo Katan personally?
Well, maybe he's not. Maybe he doesn't, but is being strategic and saying, okay, if we take out Bo, that further softens the Mandalorian thing, so we don't have to worry about that as much. I don't. Yeah, again, I'm just speculating.
I mean, it's a potential. We do have. She has mentioned like that her old group of Mandalorians that she was running with.
The Night Owls.
No, not the Night Owls. The ones. Well, I guess I don't know. The ones that were following her when she had the Darksaber, when she lost it, they just kind of left and became mercenaries.
Right. Yes.
So I don't know. We don't know if the mercenaries sold her out for whatever reason.
I guess that's possible too. But again, to who and for what reason?
Well, usually it would be something along the lines of like they got caught doing something and sold out. I don't know.
Yeah, but she's just one person. And
that's true.
So
and she has no one following her.
Exactly. So I don't know. I don't know how that serves them.
And but I mean, it's got to be somebody big is behind that for sure, because that's a lot of ties and a lot of equipment, right? So they've got to have some kind of big ship to carry all those too.
Exactly. So. Ooh, you know what would have been cool? A Superstar Destroyer. Right.
And you're also wondering how have they, whoever this is, how have they avoided the New Republic so far? Because it's not that's not very fucking obvious when you see one of those. So.
Right. I love the music here. Once the music cuts out as the bombing starts, but then picks up again as that new squadron of interceptors approaches, and it is this really heavy strings and this kind of ramping sound that's supposed to invoke fear and the chase. And so they have to evade the squadron of TIE interceptors. They jump to hyperspace, and he's like, here's some coordinates where they won't find us, right? And that's when we cut to credits or cut to the title screen. Ba-bum.
Yeah.
And then we don't see Mando for another 45 minutes. But it's still very cool. What do you make of this whole opening sequence? Anything else that
I mean, I always, like we kind of said, I always love a good dogfight, and it leaves a lot of open questions to kind of cover, obviously, over the rest of the season. I think there's still setting up kind of our villains for this set of
Sure.
chapters. So we've already kind of seen like, okay, yeah, we're probably gonna run into those pirates and the Pirate King again, and
What if the
okay,
villains are the friends we made along the way?
yeah. And then now, all right, we got some maybe leftover Imperials that we're gonna have to deal with too. So, yeah, I mean, I like a good little tease on what it's gonna,
Sure. I mean,
who the
it's a
big bad is. But
the one thing I feel like I ha- I don't feel like the show was always really good at was setting up this kind of like mystery. We always kind of there was a
right,
mystery
yeah,
about Grogu and how that works, and then that was kind of answered, you know. And
yeah,
now it's like, okay, now what? And it was kind of seemed like there was a clear path to, okay, he needs to redeem himself. That only took 1 episode, 2 episodes,
mm-hmm.
right? And now it's like, okay, now there's this greater threat that we
Yeah,
don't. It's kind of, but it's a big question mark shape, and we're introducing this kind of side story with Dr. Pershing. Pardon me, with Dr. Pershing. So, and that has its own kind of intrigue to it and mystery to it, and I'm, you know, really makes me think of it. Brings me back to Andor, and I thought that show did a great job of kind of setting up these mysteries to be pretty interesting when they all come together, and doing so in kind of like multi-episode arcs, right?
right,
And
yeah,
it's potentially that what we're seeing here is another kind of multi-episode arc sequence setting up, which they haven't really done. I mean, it was a lot of standalone, mission of the week episodes, especially last season and the first season, um, and now I think they're doing a little bit more of a tightly woven story, which I appreciate, and I think it's much more in line with, I think, modern audience expectations
yeah,
for a show of this scale. Okay, let's continue. So we cut to Coruscant, and this is kind of surprising. I don't think anyone was expecting this. And we get establishing shots of the city. What's nice is that we went years without seeing Coruscant. Not once during the sequel trilogy of movies did we visit Coruscant, and then not at all in the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian.
yeah,
And now all of a sudden, between Andor and Obi-Wan and Mando, we've visited Coruscant quite a bit, and I gotta say, love it. I'm a big fan of it. We also get a nod later on to the idea that there's other Equinopolises on or in the Star Wars galaxy. We've actually seen one before. It ultimately gets destroyed in Episode 7, in Hosnian Prime, but
oh, okay, yeah,
but Coruscant's obviously the number one Equinopolis in everyone's heart.
yes,
And of
yeah,
course, this is a word that I can use now because it describes it in the show.
yeah. Here's a question:
Sure.
how does Coruscant have an atmosphere if there's no?
If they use, my understanding is that the weather is all controlled
Okay, so
by
it's like a dome, like they have a planetary shield
no,
that
no, no, no. Oh, well,
probably.
maybe they have a planetary shield, but it's all artificial weather. Is basically how they do it. And
An
they
artificial
cycle through
air?
storms, and no, the air is probably real, but they probably use recyclers and stuff.
Right,
Yeah,
because how do you have fresh oxygen if you don't have trees and shit?
that's what I'm saying. They probably use recyclers.
Ah,
It's
okay.
it's a city-sized planet. They have entire
Okay.
areas that they could use for recycling air and pushing air
Fair
around
enough.
and
Yeah,
stuff.
I guess that's the thing. Because I was like, well, there's no. We kind of talked about this last week with Mandalore, and like, well, how is there air on Mandalore if like everything's crystallized, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
That's a
but
great
I mean,
question. It's one of those things where it's best not to ask.
best not to think about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
Okay.
different. It's a galaxy far, far away. The air is different.
Yeah,
They
I do
breathe
love.
different.
I love how busy the city looks. We get this nighttime
Yeah.
shot of Coruscant, and it is vibrant, and fun. And then, of course, we get a shot of none other than the Opera House, which is where we get one of the best Star Wars scenes of all time from Episode 3, where Palpatine reveals the whole Sith thing to Anakin for the first time.
Right. You're right. Yes.
Is it possible to learn this power? Not from a Jedi. That scene, and they actually do some really cool things where they call back from a shot per shot perspective, the shot of the hallway, the shot of the exterior, the shot of walking into your balcony seats are all pulled from Episode 3, and kind of replicated here.
Okay.
And I think that's really cool. I love Love that scene in episode 3. That's one of the best ones. That's the tragedy of Darth Plagueis for those who are uninitiated. And in our friend of the show, Ryan Airy from Screen Crush, talked about in his recap this idea that this episode, or this portion of this episode, is a analog to Anakin's fall from grace, and that's what we're seeing with Dr. Pershing.
Oh, okay.
And kind of being manipulated against your will to kind of turn from the light, right? And I really like that concept, so I'm going to run with that a little bit in this episode. We'll call out where those moments seem to fit, but it's just nice that, you know, it kind of fits neatly, especially at the beginning here. It starts at the Opera House.
Yes,
right? Yeah. Which is, of course, where that kind of that pivotal moment takes place in episode 3 with Anakin, and is also where we kick off here. And what he's doing is he's giving a speech, which is interesting. I feel like there's two kind of ideas being held together at the same time that I don't quite mesh. So he's able to sell out the Opera House and give a speech that lots of people saw, right?
Right.
But he still has to go by a number. He still has to go by his like L57 number or whatever, and has to live in this, you know, this special housing and go by all these special rules. But yet he's also this like celebrity figure. So it's like, I feel like those two things kind of clash a little bit.
Okay, so
you know?
maybe I saw this a little bit differently. That like I didn't necessarily see it as him on his own at the Opera House doing this like speech. Like, you know, kind of
No,
feels
he
like
was a guest speaker at a.
Okay, yes, that's
yeah.
what I thought. I thought this was like one of those things where they're showing off, like, oh look, we can reintegrate people, and
Yeah,
like
the
he
amnesty
was,
program.
yeah,
Look how well it's working.
it was
right?
like a TED talk.
Yeah.
So it's like he got to do his like, you know, 15 minutes or whatever to talk about the amnesty program and you know, how good it is or whatever, and you know, it giving him a second chance. And yeah, it was a little bit more about like how people can be reformed, where you don't have to just
amnesty,
throw them
the
in
official
prison.
definition is an official pardon for people who have been convicted of political offenses.
Right.
Quote, an amnesty for political prisoners. The new law granted amnesty to those who illegally left the country. Okay,
Yes.
so this is the most appropriate word that you could use here, because it's literally talking about providing a second chance to those who were a part of the empire, and are being, quote unquote, reintegrated into society as a part of the new republic.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So I think it's really cool, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I think the concept of the amnesty program is really cool. I think obviously there's flaws in the whole thing, cracks in the armor, but we'll get to that.
But it's obviously a very different way of handling things than the Empire would do, which is part of what the, you know, this new republic should be. Is like, yeah, okay, it makes sense that they're trying to give people second chances, because if they just come in and they're just as bad as the Empire and they just kill everybody and put them in work camps forever, like, then they're no better, right? So,
well, yeah, it is in line with the rebellion and the republics and the new republic's kind of belief in reform and democracy,
and
right?
Not everybody is necessarily bad. It's like, okay, well, what were you supposed to do when the Empire took over and the Emperor took over? You know, I think they have to have some compassion for certain,
but it's also not a free for all, and so I think that's the distinction. So,
but yeah, you also have to live in this housing, and you have to go by these rules, and you're basically on like parole.
I think the dehumanizing of them by removing their ability to use names, I think, is particularly
odd,
cruel. I think, and not helpful. I don't. Think
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I think that's a little odd. You know, that's like a step in the bad direction for sure.
It does remind me of how, you know, like, we love the clones. The clones give themselves names, and then anyone who calls them by their number is like very disrespectful. Right? It feels that way, and this feels giving me that exact same vibe. So,
but I guess that's kind of the thing, right? It's like the Galactic Republic gave clones numbers and, you know, not names.
Yeah,
that kind
but
of thing
they also
too,
didn't enforce. They also, you know, only the assholes were the ones who enforced the whole number thing.
Oh yeah, you know? Like any of the generals like knew their
exactly
adopted names. Yeah.
So Dr. Pershing has a couple choice lines here. He says, my research was twisted into something cruel and inhumane at the behest of a desperate individual intent on using cloning technology to secure more power for himself. Now, who could he possibly be talking about there? He's talking about Emperor Palpatine. I do like the kind of couple things he says here. He doesn't call him by name. I think that's probably Palpatine. The name is probably very similar to he who shall not be named situation.
Right.
Real
Yeah.
Voldemort situation. It's like, well, that's not to talk about him, right? It's kind of like, I'm sure the name Hitler was probably not something that people wanted to talk about.
Yes.
For a long time. So
yeah.
I like the use of the word desperate here. He was a desperate individual, intent on using intent. So he had no other plan. The plan was cloning, and he was desperate to make sure that it worked because he was dying. He was old, right? And he wanted it to secure more power for himself, or in this case, not give up power ever, right? Not even after death. Now, the tragic piece of this whole thing is that, of course, it works.
Yeah.
Somehow Palpatine returns does happen, and he does achieve his goals. How much Dr. Pershing will become a part of that, we shall see. But it is nice to start here with him kind of really believing in this amnesty program and believing that, despite, he says here, I assure you that my original intentions were good. I mean, we've heard that before, right? The road to hell was paved with good intentions is a saying that we all know. And so there's a lot of these kind of like little pieces, little clues along the way, and these are kind of where those similarities to Anakin come in, because he felt like he was doing the right thing, right? When both basically the entire time, he always felt like he was doing the right thing, right? And his intentions were good, but he let that kind of twist himself be twisted by those motivations, and that's, we see that actually happen to him by him, I mean Dr. Pershing, in this episode. So he tells a story about how he lost his mother. Again, another similarity to Anakin, right? But in this case, to heart failure. He argues that an organ cloning, if it had been readily available, would have prevented her death, and it's basically his secret origin, right? He dedicated his life from that moment forward to becoming a cloning scientist so that he could help other people's mothers not die from a bad heart.
Yeah.
Right? It's a nice organs, story. Yeah. It's his Batman origin, right? So so other boys don't have to be killed, and their parents don't have to be killed in a back alley, right? I'll become Batman. He thanks the Kaminoans, saying that, thanks to their research, we were able to prove that you can clone an entire body from one strand of DNA. And he says he believes that you can do it by merging together strands from multiple donors. I guess the concept here is that for the whole cloning process to work with midichlorians is that you need a host body and then some sort of other element, DNA element, that allows you to be force sensitive for that whole empire.
Interesting.
I don't know. I'm speculating. I don't know.
Yeah, I was curious what he was talking about, like about from two donors, and I was like, what do they mean by two donors? Like cloning?
Yeah, so
like making
Grogu and the
people,
Emperor
or
together,
make
Snoke, I guess, or something. I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
So after the speech, he gets surrounded by aristocrats. This is also very Andor-esque, right? The kind of high society of Coruscant. They have largely been distant from any wars, right? They're like talking about, the Outer Rim, I would never, right?
Yeah, they're like unaffected. They're by like who's in control,
right.
pretty much.
We like to stay out. We don't like to get ourselves involved, I think one person says, right? The one person says, the rebellion, the Empire, the New Republic, it's hard to keep track, right?
Yeah.
Because to him, it's just another, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. But
must be nice.
But I think the problem is, what the New Republic was trying to achieve was a different mentality, that this is not the corrupt Republic from before, and that we want to do different, we want to be better, but they were easily corruptible,
right?
As a government, because of their kind of weak stance on different things, and particularly there's different, pacifism has come up a lot in our conversations about this, but the New Republic's decision to demilitarize almost entirely, completely backfires on them, right? So, hindsight being 20/20 and all, but it just feels like, in their attempt to be so much not the Empire, they fail to kind of grasp the nuances of what that actually means, and what actually works in terms of ruling an entire galaxy.
Right.
Okay, so any thoughts on this kind of opening sequence with Dr. Pershing, the Opera House, anything else like that?
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was very interesting, right? Especially like that whole scene with the uppity ups of the when I'm like, of
Right.
course they have no like real thoughts or feelings on anything.
But hey, it's nice to see an alien in there again. It's not just people, right? Not
Yeah.
just humans, right? Okay, so Pershing takes a taxi home to the Amnesty Housing District. The driver, which is a clone, kind of based on the original concept art for C-3PO, chats him up, which is very funny, about visiting the Botanical Gardens, the Hyperspace Museum. I think the Hyperspace Museum is interesting because I don't know how much they would mention about the Purgle, but there might be some reference in there to the Purgle.
Oh, yeah.
And the Holographic Museum of Extinct Animals, where we get a Malastare reference, which is nice. Planet we've seen before. But more importantly, Purgles might be there too, because for all people know, people think that Purgles are extinct. I also mentioned, I feel like one point saying that the Purgles, there was this like whaling phase of the Empire. Sorry, not the Empire, but of I guess of galactic history.
Yeah,
I guess that's not entirely accurate. So slight correction, which is that they died from getting hit by. A lot of them died from getting hit by ships in hyperspace lanes. They were just big and took up a lot of space, and then would get hit by ships and die. So they were kind of there's less of them because there's so many more ships now.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah. When he arrives at the housing complex, he is greeted by other Amnesty members, and officers, I guess they're called. And again, they use numbers here instead of names, which I just do find very odd.
Mm-hmm.
And then they mentioned the Reintegration Institute, which sounds a lot like kind of like in this case they call it deprogramming, I think from this perspective, from the New Republic perspective, but it would be like a re-education camp essentially.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, to me it kind of feels like when inmates get out on parole and then they go to a halfway house, and part of staying in the halfway house is to like help them get a job, right? So it's kind of that like in between of like the next step of reintegrating you into society that isn't jail. But you still have times that you have to be back and home and all that kind of stuff.
In this case, it's kind of like they have a curfew and they have like a parole officer. But the Reintegration Institute does sound a lot more like a jail.
Yeah, it does.
And that, like, I imagine it's like a series of like quote unquote classes. They're probably like there's probably not a lot of violence used, but they're probably not allowed to leave. And they're probably being taught things about what the Empire did was wrong, and how they helped allow that to happen was wrong, and here's how we try to do things differently and try to paint this new perspective of kind of being a better person.
Right.
It probably is. It's hard to drill that into people. It's hard to use kind of that tactic to make people better people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like I'm sure some people do well with it and others don't, and the whole point of that like is to evaluate whether they can be reintegrated into society or not, or whether they're just like an actual war criminal.
So are these people that are arrested, like is every Imperial officer arrested and then they go through some sort of tribunal? And
I would assume, yes.
Right, interesting. Okay.
Like I would assume if your ship is captured or whatever, right? Like the Moffs and stuff, like Moff Gideon, who have done worse things. Just depends. Like if you're just a tech analyst on an Empire ship, like
I don't know. I mean, I don't know where you draw the line then. You know what I'm saying?
Because that's what I mean. I'm sure everybody goes at first and then they kind of evaluate people from there on like what their role was within the Empire and what things they did and did not participate in. But
it's interesting. I would like to know more. This is that world building stuff that I find that Andor did a lot of that I find interesting. Okay, so he does call out Elia Kane, who is the person we saw from the recap, because of her association with Moff Gideon. He says, "I didn't expect to see anyone from Moff Gideon's ship here." That name obviously still carries a lot of weight.
Yeah.
and people are like, "Oh, a Gideon reference." Um,
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, you worked for Gideon?" Like,
yeah, it's like,
yeah.
"Ooh," and so her face kind of shifts a little bit. They briefly talk about Gideon saying that they heard that he escaped en route to the war tribunal. They heard that that was just an excuse for him having been hooked up to a mind flare, etc. Um, we don't know the truth to that. We talked about this already. It's likely he escaped. That's my hunch on that.
Right.
Um, Alaya, though, kind of toes the company line. She says, I'm just here because I want to do good and I want to be better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She's really good
Right.
at telling people what they want to hear.
Yeah, it feels like she's kind of regurgitating the whatever the stuff that they teach you
Exactly.
in the amnesty program. Yeah.
Right. And then I do like the twist on like the Long Live the Empire with the Long Live the New Republic.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that's, Long Live the King kind
Yeah.
of scenario here. So I did enjoy that, and there's little cheers, and they're drinking what looks like margaritas. So I'm all on board. He joins them for a drink, and they talk about all the people and the differences from the Empire, right? And oh man, it's so different, right? There is this weird transition because they're talking to this one guy, and he sits down, and it looks like they're gonna have this like full table conversation, but then it like cuts to Dr. Pershing talking basically one-on-one with Alaya.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, and then you can hear the other conversation as like in the background, and it's like really, I think, awkward because it's like, wait, are you just ignoring that person so you can talk to this person separately, or how's that working? Anyway, I just thought that could have been done a little bit differently. There doesn't even need to have been those other people there, but I guess that's fine. So basically, they talk about how they've kind of going through this transition, and kind of what that entails. She offers to show him around, saying, "Hey, if you haven't, if this is new to you, I can show you around." And then again, weirdly, they all come back together again to have another group conversation, and they start talking about what they miss from the old days. And I do also like how Dr. Pershing is like hesitant to answer that. Yeah, that's a trick. I don't miss anything about the Empire.
Yeah.
And then they're all like, no, we mean like the small stuff, like the food or whatever. And I can't imagine the food of the Empire was good, but maybe if you're an officer, it was.
Right, military food, yeah.
Right. So Pershing, he wants to fit in, so he says that he liked the yellow travel biscuits from the ration packs.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of cute. I like the reference to ration packs, which of course I think were often notoriously terrible.
Yes,
one of the people there talks about how they hope they never see a ration pack again, which is all fine. And so it seems like he's kind of fitting in, which is nice. I think he probably feels good about that. So he goes back to his room to listen to some factoids about Coruscant. Obviously, he's never been there before. I think that's something that kind of is briefly touched on, but just again to highlight why he's doing that. He's listening to factoids about Coruscant because this is new to him. He's never been there before. We learned that it's an Equinopolis, as we said before, which means city, planet, a planet that's entirely a city. They say how, despite being called the center of the galaxy, it's not technically in the center of the galaxy, which if you look at a star map of the Star Wars, you know that it's in the core, which is closer to the middle, but not the middle.
Right.
And then he's surprised by delivery of Imperial biscuits. Now, here's the thing. From watching this show, from watching just any drama, from watching The Bad Batch, and we'll talk about this later with The Bad Batch as well, but I'm just constantly paranoid, right? So,
yeah.
He gets his doorbell, and like after running into this Alaya character who I certainly don't trust.
No, of course not.
He gets this knock on the door, and he goes to check it. No one's there. I'm like, I said to my girlfriend at the time, I was like, he's gonna get assassinated. Someone's gonna kill him, right, or something. And that's not what happens. It just turns out that someone left him a box of biscuits, the yellow biscuits that he
even
liked.
When he picked up that black box, I was like, is that a bomb? Like, you're just gonna open
exactly.
that?
Right, exactly. And it's in this black box that looks very imperial, right?
And I was like, oh, it's cookies. Okay. Very cute.
What did you make of this whole bit of him coming back to this complex and meeting these other people and getting these cookies and all that stuff?
I thought in general that the complex itself was very interesting because kind of like we said, it's more of a like the next step of reintegration.
Sure.
But it's almost like being on parole or like halfway, like whatever. So yeah, I think it's a very unique system because even they say it in the show at this point, like the Empire would never, right?
Right.
Just give you whatever housing and let you hang out in the courtyard and have drinks with people and,
Right.
that kind of thing as you're
The
being
small stuff.
reintegrated.
That stuff's
Yeah.
nice. Mm-hmm.
So, you get to see the difference between how the New Republic and how the Empire treats people, right? So
Right.
you're thinking like, okay, maybe this is why this amnesty program works, because the New Republic is treating people with this different kind of dignity and respect, and
Well,
maybe
and
it
you got to
can
consider
work, but
these are like they have a house on the surface level of Coruscant, and that is
yeah.
actually in and of itself pretty impressive,
Well,
right?
exactly. And, so they're talking about, okay, like it seems like, at least for some of these people, it is working. But
Right.
yeah, obviously we don't trust, what's her name there? I don't know why I
Elia.
can't. Elia. Yeah, Elia
Elia?
Kane.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, she
She
looks
has a good
shifty
her
for the
face. Her
beginning.
face is she's got something with her face. She just comes off as disingenuous, you know.
Well, yeah, and like Pershing was always not necessarily a bad guy, even when
That's true.
in the first
That's
season. Like
true.
I'm pretty sure even when he
Well,
has
he didn't want
Grogu,
Grogu to be killed. He's like just a
he didn't.
child, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like he didn't. So exactly. So it's like, he's always had a bit of a soft spot. I think he never was fully Empire,
Right.
even when they were still around, kind of thing. So but yeah, I just think it's a very unique story to be telling. It's not one that I was expecting to get.
Yeah, especially not in the Mandalorian. But I'm
No.
I'm happy to get this, like, learn this stuff. We actually learn quite a lot. You mentioned, the differences between the Empire, but we also see a lot of similarities to the Empire, and that's where we see the next scene, which is Pershing working in a cubicle, which seemed very reminiscent of the little like thing that Andor,
Okay.
what's his name, and Andor was working on.
Cyril, yes,
Karn, yeah.
but at the same time, it was still different.
It was
Like
a little
to me,
nicer.
it was
Right.
like it gave a little bit of more of like a boring office vibe, whereas
Sure.
like the Empire ISB version was very like cold and strict and kind of like intimidating
Well, it
and
was also
scary.
it was also a boring office, to be clear, but
Right. Yeah.
but much
But
more.
then this
But you're right,
one is like,
scarier.
okay, bright, and like you have coworkers that chit chat with you,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, you have to do some like menial, boring work or
Yeah, I think
whatever. But
the reality it shows that the reality is for a society to function. There's work still needs to be done,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it seems to me like this work could be done by droids personally, but
probably.
who knows? It's cheaper than droids, right? People
but
are
it's
cheaper than droids.
it's part of their what you would call your work. I don't know what you
Right.
call that after you leave prison and stuff, like, but part of your
Yeah, so they're getting their his first kind of like work
Yeah.
job, basically, that he can, a government job that he's basically been assigned. And so he's greeted by a colleague who's bringing him basically more work to do.
Yeah.
And they say Happy Bendu Day,
Yeah.
which is interesting. What do you make of that? What do you think that means?
Okay, but don't you remember who Bendu is?
I do, of
Okay,
course.
so I'm like, I don't know if they're referencing, if that's just a little Easter egg from Rebels.
Right. So
about
Bendu, of
Bendu.
course, is I think the thing is that it wasn't his name or a species. It was kind of like it was like, I am the Bendu, but I also am Bendu.
Right.
He was like this force sensitive being.
Yeah.
That had chit chats with Ezra and Kanan.
Kanan, and also helped them escape Thrawn off of
Yes.
that planet that they were kind of hiding on, because he was like,
Yes.
Bendu's like a huge force being too, like not even just like he's not just like a force sensitive like thing. He was almost
like a being of the force,
like almost not omnipotent, but like
Thrawn, like an angel. He's basically an angel.
Yeah, like Thrawn tries to shoot him and he just disappears, and then just goes like ha ha ha, like laughs and like
Right.
is still around. So it's like he can't really be killed, it seems.
Yeah.
So yeah,
he's basically God,
cool.
and so
like a god. Yeah, exactly.
It seems to me like maybe that the concept of Bendu's been around so long that it's just been like taken on the name of the week, right?
Yeah,
I think Bendu Day, just like Thorns Day or whatever they say later in the episode.
Okay, that's a different thing too.
Yeah, we'll get to that, but I think that means like it's like Happy Monday. Or
yeah,
like,
yeah,
that's basically what he's saying, right?
Well, so, it's like Thursday, even like our Thursday used to be Thor's Day.
Thor's Day, exactly. Yeah, so I think that's where that's coming from. But it's cool that it's Bendu that they're using there.
Yeah,
so
yeah. There's.
I wonder if that was still the case when it was the Empire. It must have been. Like,
I would
the thing
assume
is,
that the days of the week don't change on Coruscant. Like, it's
yeah,
like we don't know how many that they have or like what their
yeah.
actual like
Are there
rotation
7 of
is, but
them? Or is there
yeah,
10 of them? I mean,
depends
the
on the
thing is, though, we
rotation.
never knew what the days of the week were called, and now we're learning them. We learned
Yeah,
2 in one episode, so that's wild.
yeah, we get
You
2
know,
whole Star Wars days of the week.
that's right. Now, who knows how many more we get to learn? You
Yeah,
know, so I don't know. For me, I love this little stuff. Is where like say what you will about this part of the episode. Maybe it wasn't for you, but I love learning this kind of stuff.
oh
Tell me
yeah,
more about the days of the week,
it's just a
right?
fun little like I don't know, like it's a little bit of an Easter egg, I guess, but it's also just I don't
Sure,
know, it's just fun. Yeah,
it is an Easter egg. This is like the definition of an Easter egg.
yeah,
Um, the coworker mentions how he saw his talk and is kind of like, well, I'm surprised that we have you working here, considering how experienced you are.
yeah,
And again, another example of how kind of this amnesty program doesn't take into account apparently people's aptitudes, right?
yes, yeah,
So if you want people to feel fulfilled, they want to do things that they are good at, right? So maybe putting the scientist to do menial data entry work is probably not the best idea. For
right.
instance,
But at the same time, it's like, what are you gonna do? Just give this guy who was doing
put him
like
to work. Put him to work doing serving. He talks about how his work could have served
that's
good
true, that's
if it
true.
had been in the right hands.
But
And right,
maybe
that's
they're
kind of
like
his motivator here.
worried like, okay, if we let this geneticist, maybe
Yeah,
he'll
but you
go
can
back
just supervise
to
him. You don't
yeah,
have
that's
to.
true.
You know what I
That's
mean?
true.
Like, if you
But
don't create this environment of fear and
yeah,
that the Empire had, right?
right.
Then you're less likely to exploit his science for evil,
Well,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Or be exploited for evil. So I don't know. I just feel like it's like, hey, it'd be like saying, oh, hey, before the war you were a plumber. Well, I guess we can't trust you with a wrench, so here's a piece of paper. It's like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that doesn't, it
yeah.
wouldn't make sense, right?
That's fair. That's fair.
So, he's just happy to be there, basically, though, right? He's just like, I'm just happy to help however I can. Which, again, this kind of like really wholesome attitude, which is very endearing, I thought. That evening, Pershing visits Monument Park with Alaya. Now, a Monument Park is a place we've actually seen snippets of in other shows, in Clone Wars, and we've seen even in Return of the Jedi in the remastered version. There's a set you can see a piece of that there. I've never really clocked it as a thing, and this kind of the concept of there being a park around the top of a mountain is really cool to me.
Yeah, yeah.
So just to kind of just spell it out. So the park is built around the peak of Umat, which is the tallest mountain on Coruscant, and you can just see it barely sticking out of the ground. And they say that it's the only place on the planet you can actually see the surface, which is fucking wild.
Right?
Honest,
yeah.
Right?
It's pretty cool because it's like all these other buildings like literally still tower over it in comparison.
Right. Yeah.
And we know that Coruscant goes so deep too.
Mm-hmm. Well, deep as a mountain, at least.
Which is very, very interesting. So yeah, because I guess that's the thing. You don't really have people walking way down below. It's just not like people have ships or they
wouldn't
have.
even get. How do you even get there?
Yeah,
take one of those elevators from Andor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting it's like one of the only spots you can actually see the real Earth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. I thought it was super cool, to be honest. Like,
yeah, it's a very cool concept. I was like, that's
a very
really
cool sci-fi concept. Yeah. So it's a delightful place. There's music playing. You might recognize the music because it's Star Wars music from Episode 7. It's March of the Resistance, which plays. I think you'll most dun 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 dun, which plays when when Poe comes to the rescue at the castle at in the middle halfway through the movie. But it's in a lot of stuff. You hear it all the time. It's the Resistance theme. We also see, which is interesting, this music being played diegetically, which means it's in the actual world itself, which means that song is in the world itself. It's in Star Wars.
Right, yeah.
So that's, in and of itself, not that interesting, but it is kind of fun when it happens. We see people doing up-close magic, which is fun. There's a stilt walker. That's just like, again, there's this kind of culture is brought back into the world. Okay, so we do learn a couple things. We learn that Alaya she's been to Coruscant before, and the reason that she has is because she trained at the Imperial Academy on Coruscant. Now, when she said that, I was like, ooh, because I was like, now I definitely don't trust her.
No.
Because only the real true believers were sent to Coruscant for training. That was kind of like officers training, and it was, there's not a lot of people who went to the Imperial training facility on Coruscant that didn't become like the kind of upper echelon leadership of the
big
Empire.
bad guys. Yeah.
So that for me was a sign that something wasn't right here. Did you clock that as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, her whole vibe, and then plus that, it's like, oh, okay, like you attended the actual Coruscant level. I don't know if that's ISB or not too, or if they have anything to do with that academy, but yeah,
it's probably the military academy,
right? Yeah.
Anywho's and how they are just kind of they're eating ice cream, weird looking ice cream, but it's fun. And this is kind of where we get the most kind of just straight up dialogue, basically. And we learn, as I said before, that she's from the Imperial Academy. She sees that, hey, for her, Coruscant's not that different. Again, this is kind of playing to that what those aristocrats were saying. It's not that different for her. The only difference is that there's, there isn't a bunch of cogwheels around, right? And she says but then when she recognizes the look on Pershing's face, he's like, really? It's not that different? She's like, well, it feels different.
Right, yeah.
And she's like, well, I thought we were doing good. And this is where she really starts leaning into that, regurgitating that language, kind of really saying what she thinks that he wants to hear, right? How, you might not trust me from being on that really scary ship, but don't worry, I'm a good person now.
Yeah, I've been reformed.
Yeah. He does talk about how he regrets not finishing his research, right? And she asks why he didn't continue it. He's like, well, I would, but the ethics of cloning are complicated, which I think is a really great line of dialogue. So when you're talking about written by a 4-year-old, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, yeah.
But
it is so true. Like,
because I mean, the ethics of cloning are complicated in our world,
exactly,
right? Where it's like only barely possible, right? And in the Star Wars world, where there's literally a whole army full of clones, and the implications of which were obviously clearly not handled well by the Empire, truly inhumanely. There's a lot of lingering resentment probably about cloning as a concept. Its dangers, what it can mean, right? So, I think he's right to be like, I mean, it's problematic and it's probably not the best time.
That, and I think the New Republic would have a little bit of a stricter stance on that than the Empire, because the Empire would be like, who the fuck cares? Do what I tell you. Like, I don't care. Like, the Emperor doesn't care.
They don't have ethical quandaries. They just do whatever they want.
Doesn't care about the ethics of like cloning people and what happens when things go wrong and like that kind of thing, right? So, whereas obviously this New Republic would have a little bit of a stricter sentiment on that kind of thing.
But Alaya, she urges him on. She says, there's a lot of capable people who want to help. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, this is coded language. And he says, I do understand what you're saying, but I don't think he does, actually.
No.
What is she saying here?
Well, I think to her, it's like, I think she's trying to do that thing that we see in Rebels all the time when like Sabine or whoever else was trying to like interject with people who were in the Empire to pull them out into the rebellion side. I think this is the opposite of her trying to gauge with him on where he stands.
Exactly.
Like she's trying to say like, okay, like I think she's trying to figure him out on like, have you actually like been indoctrinated with this like new way? Because there's people who
see, this is why it's so wild to me. So so
he's not picking up on that.
Let's play this out, right? So he does believe in the New Republic concepts, at least for now. And he's being manipulated by Alaya and saying like, oh, the New Republic, they have the right intentions, but there's a lot of things that they could be doing better, and there's quote unquote people out there who are trying to help, and what she's really trying to say are people trying to get us back to the way we used to be.
Exactly.
And what I don't really understand or get is, imagine being in the Empire and then seeing all this culture and like music and food and all this stuff that you wouldn't have really had access to in the Empire, and then being like, I want to go back to the old way.
I want to go back to the old way.
Let's lock that all down. That stuff sucks. That is, I think what I'd like to see is for them, the show, to paint us a picture of why she believes that.
True.
A little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is probably being on Moff Gideon's ship, and you know what I mean. Like if you're so influenced by another person, and like she's probably trying to get back to him somehow or whatever, right? So it's when you're so heavily indoctrinated into the bad side of things, you're kind of doing your best to be like, no, I want that power back. I liked when I had that ultimate rule over people.
That's so weird because like she was also she's like a mid manager. Sure, she had the ear of Moff Gideon and was maybe like a secret agent of his, but she was hardly like a like a high ranking officer. I mean, she was on the bridge, so I guess whatever. But it's
some
interesting.
People are just selfish and shitty, and they just
but also here's the other thing: the Empire's fallen at this point, right? So what are you clinging on to?
Right.
I don't know that all that stuff. I would like to see them explore that more.
Hey, we have neo-Nazis even nowadays for a reason.
Yeah,
it's that same reason of people just can't get past those beliefs that they have sometimes.
Different.
Yeah, but,
So Pershing goes to touch the mountaintop, but then a droid warns him off and also says no littering and picks up his ice cream, which is very funny. And then actually, I thought that was a really like cute little scene.
It was a really funny one, her getting him in trouble and you before. I mean, we don't trust her, obviously, but I think it had some people fooled because I'd even saw online some people being like, "Oh man, I was totally rooting for them to be friends."
Right. I could see that. I was just,
but
I'm like I said, I'm a little maybe too jaded by all this stuff, and I was like, "There's just no way.
No.
I don't trust this one."
But it is like she did seem like to genuinely find that like funny. Like, it's like I don't think she's being disingenuous with some of the stuff she's doing. It's just later on when she completely turns on him that you're like, oh shit, she's like real bad news. It's not just
she even offers to buy him a photon fizzle.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
But it sounds good. So after that, Pershing has an appointment with his parole officer, which is a droid. This is problematic for a lot of reasons. Mostly because it's extremely inhumane, and they ask questions like, "Do you still find your current housing situation comfortable? Are you able to maintain a consistent schedule?" These are all questions I think my brother probably gets from his mental health officer.
Yeah.
Is any undue stress due to work or personal matters? Any feelings of anger or resentment towards your coworkers or towards the New Republic or its representatives? So that, like, I feel like the first ones are fine. It's like, okay, if you're like, okay, no, and then they'd be like, well, maybe we can look into other methods, or maybe that triggers it's like a, like those when you're on the phone, you have like the whole web of click 9 and then 3 and then 4.
Yeah.
And then if you click the right combination of buttons, you talk to a real person, you know? Or if you click 0, sometimes you can jump right to talking to a human. I'm wondering if, depending on the answer to these questions, you get, escalated up to an actual human.
I mean, I would assume so. I think this is like a very good way of showing a system that the New Republic has set up that is not doing what it's supposed to, and like a system that is failing. They think like, oh, okay, if we check in with people all the time and make sure they're happy, but it's like you can't do it in this way because they're not going to be truthful to you, and
well,
like that's
see
such
later,
a cold, it's such a cold and like distant way to like, and like dehumanizing way to kind of like talk to somebody, right? Like, even in our own like mental health systems aren't that great,
and those are real people.
And
but I guess this is another sign of like, hey, in the real world, it's hard to get mental health resources. I'm guessing that, I mean, but there's so many people on Coruscant. You can't find people to staff these things. Come on.
Yeah. But like, how frustrating it is when you like call and you're trying to get like information from like a government site and you just want to talk to a real person, and it's just, you get the same like.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating.
Drivel over and over.
Sure.
And but so like, it's kind of showing you the whole failings of this New Republic and their systems and like the little things that are attributing to why this doesn't work.
Well, the questions are a little leading. It's like, do you feel any anger or resentment towards the New Republic or its representatives? Like, if he said yes, like, what does that mean? Is that does that mean you get sent back to that re-education center?
Well, yeah,
Right?
or do they just have a nice little chat about it? But it did seem like he could talk to this droid
It
too.
did seem like, because it had actual answers to questions that he had, and
Yeah,
like
like
knew things about him. So like, I don't. It could be
interesting, but
worse. I feel like, so maybe they thought that they created good droids. The other thing that's interesting is the droids in this room very similar to the medical droids that we've seen.
yes, yeah.
Ooba, ooba.
Yeah.
That's the sound that the medical droid told Padme to breathe
Yes. Oh my
while she was
god.
giving birth to her twins. Ooba. So I think that. So I mean, there is a little bit of like, they've got a bit of a friendly face, but it's still just a droid, right? So he does ask if he would be allowed to continue his research recreationally. The droid does answer him. He says his type of research is prohibited by the Coruscant Accords. I guess I'm not sure why he's surprised by that, but he seems particularly bummed out
Yeah.
by that one. And I think that's unfortunate. But I mean, like I said, it's like he kind of already knew the answer, you know?
Right.
Okay, so actually, I was gonna quickly search Coruscant Accords and see what comes up with that. I think that's from Bloodlines, to be honest, and I would just like to just clarify what that is. So before we get too far into this, we'll just quickly look on Wikipedia. No, first reference of the Coruscant Accords appears in The Mandalorian, Chapter 19. So
Okay.
not from Bloodlines. Too bad. I think that was a missed opportunity there for an Easter egg. Okay, so moving on here. When Pershing returns to his housing unit, he chats with Elia about continuing his research. He says, I just need some supplies, maybe a mobile lab station. And this is kind of where it's like, oh, this has all been incepted into him. Like, this manipulated thing. She has kind of planted the seed and helped it grow in his head. So it feels like it's his idea, but it was really her idea. Right? And it's like, oh, isn't it funny that she's the only one up waiting, and she's like, oh, I'm just sitting here reading, right? But waiting for him. And again, just keeps playing on this kind of insecurity of his. And she's like, oh, well, he's like, no, it's a bad idea. It's dangerous. He's like, well, for us to do it, we'd have to leave our designated perimeter. Another kind of dehumanizing thing is that they're not allowed to like just wander about freely. They can only stay in this one piece of town. And if they got caught, they'd be sent back to the Reintegration Institute. So she's like, just sleep on it, and don't worry about it. We'll talk about it later. The next day, back at his cubicle, Pershing asks about what exactly he's doing. What it is exactly that I do here. He's saying, well, the equipment that he's archiving is set to be destroyed, right?
Yes.
And he's like, well, that doesn't make sense. This is still perfectly good equipment. Equipment isn't bad. It's not the gun's fault. It's the person's problem, right?
Yes.
It's kind of like that same mentality. It's not quite the same, but similar concept, which is like, well, it's Imperial technology. He's like, yeah, but technology inherently on its own is not evil. It could still be used. And he's like, and if you just give me an opportunity, I could show you how it could be.
Right.
And he's like, whoa. Don't get so far ahead of yourself. And he says, like, we're already so far behind, and we're in the process of decommissioning the Alliance fleet. That line of dialogue is so cool because mentioned briefly in the sequel movies, and is talked a little bit about in Bloodlines, etc. But the Alliance, the Rebel Alliance, by the end of the war, had a massive fleet. It was huge, and it was able to basically scour the galaxy and take on Imperial warlords.
Right.
And win, right? And they at one point they captured, some of the stuff is legends and some is kind of being brought into canon more often. But things like they were able to capture an Imperial Super Star Destroyer, and that was a New Republic Super Star Destroyer at one point.
Right. Yes.
And things like that. And it was massive, huge fleet, biggest fleet in the galaxy. And then they're like, no, we have to decommission it all. We're going to demilitarize. Right now, again, there's merits for that on both sides, but again, ultimately, hindsight being what it is, was a mistake. Especially when you consider that obviously there's still warlords around.
That's the thing,
so why?
too. It's
what's
like,
the rush?
Yeah, like you got to keep something around, but yeah, it's bad call to do it that quickly.
Yeah. Anyway, the long story short, there's a bunch of bureaucracy preventing them from doing kind of being more free with his job or being more using his science skills for good use. And that's, again, another thing that's a little dehumanizing or can be um, hard for somebody who's trying to do the right thing. Can really feel like it's challenging when you're just having to do this menial labor and you know the right thing to do, but there's no way to achieve it. I mean,
Absolutely.
the Empire would have had a lot of that same thing too. So back with his counselor, he seems distressed. He's like showing all sorts of signs of distress that a regular human would have picked up on immediately.
Yeah.
Right. And he's basically not answering the questions really, or he just skips to like, yep, no problem, everything's great. And then he uses this like reverse logic loophole basically to like justify the way he's feeling. And he basically says, quick question, is everything we're doing here to better the New Republic? And she's like, well, yeah, of course. It's like, okay, great. That's just all I needed to know. Thank you for that. And so he heads back to his house and he tells Elia that, listen, I'm in. We're gonna go get that stuff, and they're gonna leave the next night. Cut to the next night, and he's in like this cool Blade Runner jacket. It's actually a super cool jacket in my opinion. And he's talking to himself in the mirror, and he's saying things like, "This is to help the New Republic. It's the right thing to do." And I just thought that was really cool because, again, it's this concept of like justification. You have to kind of do these mental gymnastics to justify the decisions he's making. And he knows that it's not right, and he's doing it anyway. He
has to talk himself into it. Exactly. Yeah.
So what do you make of this whole sequence of him going to work and struggling and then coming to this decision?
This is kind of like the mistakes that they're making, right? Where it's like, okay, you've put this scientist who, if you gave him the chance, could probably be a very good asset to you. At least in some way, you could have him doing a job that is a little less menial, means a little bit more to him, and he wouldn't be as dejected. But now he's easily influenced to kind of have to go back and do things secretively, right? So
yeah, and I think what's weird about it is it's like the way that they're doing it is it's like self-policing, right? So you've got like other Imperials who already have this paranoia about being ratted out, right, by their fellow officers, having to rat each other out. And I just think that that's a really stupid idea, because it's like, okay, one bad egg could totally spoil the whole bunch when if you actually flipped it the other way around and you had kind of like these positive influence people in with these amnesty officers, then you could really generate positive change, right? These people are already in a position where they want to improve, or so you believe. Putting someone who's outside of that system into that space would be able to identify more easily what's working and what's not. And maybe the scale is too much that they're not able to do that, but it just seems like an absolute error to and kind of like own goal, basically, to not have some sort of oversight over what's going on here, at least in a more kind of like humane level.
Well, exactly, yeah.
I also really like how, to be honest, say what you will about the merits of this episode. Again, it might not be for you, but it's nice to be able to explore this stuff with a character that we at least have some understanding of. So there's a lot more context, and I think that's kind of a cool way to explore it. So cut to the next night. He's wearing his Blade Runner jacket, and they're making their way to a train station. The music gets very stringy again. This time, a lot of plucking. Makes it feel very mysterious. Again, I really liked the score of this episode. Very traditional Star Wars and very operatic. They arrive at the train station. He's very nervous as he's like looking at all the aliens and the droids and stuff going on. This is classic kind of filmmaking in this way, where you kind of do these shots of first-person perspectives and like what feels like people looking at you. But what's important to remember is that people don't give a shit about anybody else, so no one's really looking at you, or at least they don't care. That's what the spotlight effect. Where you feel like you're the center of attention. And so they sneak onto a train. They do this kind of cool move where like they like jam their foot into the pay station thing. If you're actually sneaking onto a subway, it's become way harder for those who are familiar with subway stations. Some are easy to sneak onto, others are way harder, where they have these like barriers and these like passes and little doors and stuff that open. It's really hard to, and if you jump over them, it's obvious, So in this case, it's like they did this like kind of pretty cool little sneaky move. There's this little bit of foreshadowing here where he says, "You're way better at this than I am," right? Clearly indicating that like she's done a lot of this before. You have to wonder why, right? On the train, they're being stared at by this weird alien. It's kind of very cool looking, like fat alien.
Oh,
dude.
he's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And Elia cuts the tension by saying, "Tongs days, am I right?"
Yeah.
Which
like
I
being
thought
like-
was really funny.
It's like such a like like Mondays, hey? Like
Yeah, like, oh yeah. Someone's got a case of the tongs days. You
Yeah.
know, that kind of thing. Yeah. So, okay, you said this was also a reference, and I think I know what you're talking about. So.
Oh, yeah. So the Tongs are the original Mandalorians, but they're also the original inhabitants of Coruscant, like
Right.
way, way back. So they were like a humanoid, like stood up like humans, but like looked very alien.
Bipedal,
like,
right.
Yeah, bipedal gray skin. But they warred with, I can't remember what they were called, another like actual human group on Coruscant for like
Right.
hundreds and thousands of years. Eventually they get run off Coruscant. They go and
They settle
Mandalore with the first Mandalore was a Tong, or was
Right.
Tong. All the Mandalorians used to be Tongs. But
Tongs.
yeah, so then they named Mandalore after
That
the
original-
first Mandalore. That's
right,
what is
yeah.
his name outside of being a Tong. But
Right.
and then eventually they all got killed. Most of that species itself got killed off in the war with the Jedi.
Right. Okay.
So
there's tongs are completely extinct now.
Yeah, for as far as we know, they're like
Right.
mostly or relatively or extremely extinct. But
Interesting.
yeah, so like the Mandalore, the first Mandalore, was a
Right.
Tong.
Interesting.
They named Mandalore after him, and then named themselves Mandalorians, which is like sons and daughters of Mandalore.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of a cool backstory or whatever. But then
and another example of like a day of the week that's kind of inherited over a long, long time.
Yes,
right?
yeah, but it's interesting that they were original inhabitants of Coruscant until they got
that is cool.
run out. Yeah.
So as the train leaves the station, we get more kind of these glory shots of the city, while this really triumphant music plays. And I think the idea here is to show that how impressed Dr. Pershing is by the city. And they're on their way to the disposal yards to scavenge old Star Destroyers, which is cool, but also very reminiscent of an episode of The Bad Batch we just saw not that long ago.
Yes. Which is like also kind of funny that they're not. Oh, like, okay, I guess they don't want any military ships, right? So
Right.
that's why, because it's like, okay, well, those old Empire ships used to be like Galactic Republic ships that just got turned into Empire ships.
Well,
right?
yes and no. I mean, the what we see at the shipyards here is an ISD-2, which is the second generation of the Imperial Star Destroyer, which is a different design than the Venator, right? The Venators are phased out for the ISD-1, which is, of course, what we see in the very first Star Wars.
Fair enough.
Commander Chris Stinger's in the chat, says, "Sup, hello, Commander.
Hello.
Good to see you. Thank you for joining for the chat."
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I was wrong. It's like, but yeah, I guess if you're completely decommissioning all military everything, it's like, yeah, you don't need these Star Destroyers. So
yeah, and it also, you got to remember the Star Destroyers themselves being this kind of massive tool for fear that the Empire used, right?
Oh yeah.
I don't think you can really use
No.
If you're trying to decouple yourself from the past and be something new, right?
Yeah,
you can't use ISDs, right?
You'd think more people would be there trying to strip them of stuff.
Right, you would need more protection.
Like it's just like a shipyard and you can just like take the train there. Like what? What do you mean?
Well, yeah, because people work there.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess that's true.
So they're on their way, and she's like, "Well, that's where I got the biscuits," which again reveals that she was the one who got the biscuits. Anyway, they need to escape the tickets, please, droids. There's always a tickets, please person on the train, and they make their way down the train until they basically run out of train, and they need to jump between cars. I did think this is funny because if you're ever on a subway. Most of the cars are actually connected pretty easily. You can just like walk between them fairly seamlessly. And this is much more like a regular ass train where it's got like this big gap between the cars. But they are held together with that same technology that keeps pod racer pods together. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it also seemed
Uh,
like there was different like classes of trains because it seems like the next one that they hop into was like a higher class train to me too,
right, right. A different car,
or
maybe.
cabin or car.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, the other thing is interesting is like I think we saw like the similar style trains in the last season of the Clone Wars. Um, Commander, how's it going? Really good, Commander. Hope you're doing well. You said you peed off a train once when you were a kid. That sounds really cool. Actually, I wish I'd done that. I peed off a boat once, if that helps. Um, so for me, I think it's just cool seeing public transportation and how it's deployed in Star Wars. Call
Oh
me a
yeah.
nerd if you want, but whatever. And I also like that the droids have their own little buttons, so they can just have a little bridge that extends. I thought that was a fun little detail. And anyway, they make their way to the end of the train. Pershing tries the whole Tongs days, am I right move, but it's like doesn't land in the same way. And he's still a little bit shy. And they're about to get caught, although those droids could not move slower. And they're about to get caught, and then as the train is about to pull into the station, they jump off, they land on like luggage or something, and not a scratch. It's a very fun, like, whimsical adventure type moment that you would see from like a YA story or something like that. And Pershing is exhilarated. They're laughing. It's one of those kind of like, oh, can you believe we did this kind of stuff moment. And I like, to be honest, those types of moments are often very endearing. Like they really kind of help connect you with a character. And I think it works for me.
I think anyone would feel like that after they jumped off of a train. They just like skip tickets on, right? Great. Like, I don't know.
Sorry. I'm just reading what Commander Stinger's saying here. It says, my mom was really upset. I just got tired of waiting on the subway and peed off the joining part, but it kind of just splashed back.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry. It's just really funny to me. That's a good story, Commander. Not really the kind of dialogue we're looking for when we're talking about Star Wars, but I appreciate it.
But hey,
I like people opening up in the chat. That's nice.
Always good for a good train peeing story.
Did you say, just like Dr. Pershing, did you say I've never done anything like this before?
Yeah.
So anyway, they look out after the ISD. I mean, the shipyard space is getting a lot of work. It's basically exactly the same space that we saw in 2 episodes ago, or 3 episodes ago, or something like that, in the Bad Batch, when they also board a Star Destroyer that is being worked on in that same kind of shipyard. For all we know, it's the exact same spot. So that's kind of cool.
Hey, could be, yeah. Maybe there's treasure maps on these ones too. Conveniently just in the glove compartment.
Maybe, yeah. That's a different shipyard. So they break into the ship without any hassle. Tells him, oh, there's no guards. Don't worry. They're out of commission. She hands him the smallest flashlight I've ever seen. And they make their way through a dimly lit ship. We see a weird yellow-eyed bug. That was kind of fun. And some exposed wires with some green-eyed critters. It's always good to see little Star Wars critters in Star Wars. Big fan of that. She apologizes for never having introduced herself before. And again, this is one of those moments that feels especially manipulative to me.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, we must have walked past each other so many times on that ship. And
yeah.
For Pershing, it's like, well, that's just how things were. So don't take it personally. But she knows who he is, and what he was doing. And to kind of reframe it like, oh, this is us meeting for the first time for real, feels extra shady to me.
It gives you those like the, I don't know, kind of like those vibes of somebody when you were like, because she was obviously a higher rank than him, right? Or like, more popular. So it's like the person who used to like ignore you or bully you in high school, like years later being like, oh man, like I'm sorry, I should have talked to you more, I should have hung out with you more, but it's still super manipulative.
That old move.
Yeah, they're only doing it to like because they want to sell you something nowadays, or like to make themselves feel better for being a shitty human back in the day.
Right.
You're just like, oh yeah, she's basically used to be like the popular kid that was mean to like the dorky scientist boy.
But it's worse than that. It's like in this case, she's doing it specifically to get him to commit a crime, basically.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
it's they do this formal intro and they shake each other's hands. It's nice. So they reach the lab on the ship and he starts packing up what I thought was a really cool looking space suitcase. And Didn't you think that was cool? I just thought it was like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
cool chest thing. And they talk about how for the the first time he was in a fancy lab like this, how his mom would have really loved it because she was a doctor and never really had access to those kinds of ships. And they start talking about their childhood a little bit here,
Mm-hmm.
and this part is so cool to me because this is like this one little element, this little tidbit that we get from Alaya that I think is actually real, where we haven't really got a lot of that. So he's saying like, well, he's always wanted to be a scientist ever since he was a kid, right?
Right.
And he's like, well, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a kid? And she's like, I never had a chance to think about it,
Hmm.
right? So what does that mean, right? It could mean a couple things. It could mean that she was a child soldier, right?
Right. Yeah.
It could mean that and that she was like one of those like orphans that was abducted by the Empire, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that
Um,
even like, when we saw the Empire training in flight school and stuff, like they're training
right.
kids to
Yeah.
be fighter pilots and TIE fighter pilots and that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, and so I mean, so that's an element of it, or it's just that she was indoctrinated from when she was so young that she never really considered any other alternatives.
right.
But either way, it gives the sense that she had maybe a rough childhood, which is potentially why she was so easily manipulated herself.
Right.
And it'd be interesting to explore that a little bit. Commander Stinger, with another good zinger, another zinger from Stinger here. Sometimes you gotta give your bully a kiss on the lips, and you know what? That might be true, but it doesn't have to be on the lips. All right, so they hear a sound and they're like, "Oh, it's just the ship settling."
Yeah.
But he's like, "But we should hurry up anyway." So he
It's
finishes
never
packing.
the ship settling.
Sometimes it might be the ship settling.
Yeah.
Sometimes. There was a sound early on when they were like just boarding for the first
Fair
time with
enough.
like a creaking thing that sounded like the ship settling. And so he finishes packing. They make their way out. They narrowly avoid getting caught by some guards, and they make a break for the exit. They're crossing the bridge that they crossed to get in, but they have their flashlights on.
Right? This bugged me, and I said the same thing when
Yeah.
I was like, I'm like, okay, yeah, good job just running with your flashlights on. Like
Well,
that's
it could
not
be more
super
obvious.
obvious. Yeah.
Exactly. But you know what? In retrospect, she probably left her flashlight on
On
because
purpose.
she wanted to get caught.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I
I was like, real good stealth mission. Just
yeah,
swing your
right?
flashlight around wildly.
Exactly. So they end up getting caught by this guard ship thing. Really cool like gunship style design.
Mm-hmm.
And they're under arrest. But then there's this sinister moment where she just when she makes her face go like blank.
Yeah.
She looks very creepy, and I think that's like a really
does.
impressive move that this actress Katie M. O'Brien is able to do.
Yeah, so she can just turn around and she's immediately with them too. You're
right.
Like, oof.
Ooh. Yeah, and so this is okay. So explain to me what you think is happening here. This whole
to me,
twist.
This was like a setup. Like she purposefully told them that this was going to be happening, and like she set him up to get caught.
For what end? To what end?
Well, I guess we have to kind of figure out her motives here because, right, when she turns around and you can kind of see it on his face, like he's kind of confused too.
Right.
Because it's like she just walks away, doesn't really say anything to him. And then he feels like he can also just walk away. And he tries to just start following her. And they're like, no, you're under arrest.
You are under arrest. Yeah.
Yeah. But
also
yeah.
he's knocked out or something. It's like he wakes up on that bed.
Oh
later,
yeah. I think they probably just stun him or whatever. But yeah, so I mean, her motivations we don't necessarily know yet. I wasn't too sure if this was something she does to
get him in that machine.
Maybe because he knew she was on Gideon's ship and she doesn't want people to keep knowing that or whatever. So I don't know if it's a little bit of a revenge or something because of that, of him telling those people that she was on Gideon's ship. But then also I would assume it has a little bit with her to do, or a little bit to do with her wanting to move up with this new republic in a way to further whatever other sinister thing she wants to do. So I think she's trying to gain the trust of the new republic, of being like, oh look, I'm helping you find.
It's a dual purpose, right?
Yeah,
she's ingratiating herself to her handlers, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then at the same time furthering her own ends, which are at this point still a mystery.
Right. Because it's if she just left this guy alone, he wouldn't have ever done any of this. He would have probably
exactly. But she strung him along, to get him to do this whole thing, then set him up to take the fall so that he ends up in this machine. And then here's the thing that's crazy, right? She's just allowed to like be in the room with the gear on her own.
Yeah, that guy just walks away. He's like, okay, yep, sweet. And it does seem like he's like, Pershing's freaking out, being like, this is a mind flare. Like, I know what this is, which I'm assuming it wipes your memory.
I mean, that's what they say. I think it makes you go insane. I think it's like a evolution of the technology that the Doctor in Andor used. That's my guess.
I mean, like, because mind flares are a thing in like multiple other mediums, not just Star Wars.
Well, Stranger Things specifically, obviously.
They're also like a thing in like Dungeons and Dragons, and they basically like eat your brain. Like so it's just very interesting to me that they have this technology and they're using it, but they're like, oh no, it's nothing like that. But it is, because you can turn it up to be that level.
Yeah, it's like, why would you even still have the settings to go all the way to brain melting?
So it's like, okay,
don't worry, we won't turn it up to brain melting.
It's just soothing colors, and it's going to make you more compliant.
When they turn it on, it does look like he's like, oh, this is actually quite nice.
Yeah. But then she turns it up, and he's like, oh, okay. So it's like, is she frying his brain?
It's so wild, because like, there's no oversight. Like, no one's there monitoring the patient, and no one's there monitoring the equipment. They're just like, sure, we'll just it's like that scene in Austin Powers where it's like, close the door, and it's like, I'm just going to assume that it went off without a hitch.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like, no, I have a gun, I'll go to my room, we'll get it, we'll shoot them together, it'll be fun. Right? And he's like, you just don't get it, do you, Scotty?
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite moments of. I just use that all the time. I constantly reference that.
Well,
but this idea that like, we'll just trust it's gonna work. What could possibly go wrong?
And she like she words it in such a way like, oh, he's my friend, I just want to be here for him.
Right.
So the guy's just like, all right, cool, he's your friend, I'll just leave. Like,
has no one else noticed her complete lack of humanity when she turns off her face?
Right.
It's really wild. So he wakes up in this chair, and apparently a report has already been submitted by Alaya that says that he's been struggling with the transition. And anyway, yada yada yada. He's basically lied on his behalf again, and he's being inserted into a mind flare, but they call it a 602 mitigator, a quote non-invasive experimental treatment recently approved for rehabilitation. And he says at low voltage, and this is a Mon Cala, by the way, I really loved his voice for some reason. It just felt very like whimsical Star Wars to me. At low voltage, they use it to soothe select traumatic memories. And obviously, Pershing's worried that they're going to use it to wipe his mind. He yells that it was a trap, which I think is not a coincidence.
I know. Right?
Especially because he's yelling it to a Mon Cala.
To a Mon Cala. Yeah, I caught that too.
Yeah. She set him up, right? And no one's listening. I think that's the other thing. It's like, if someone says I was set up and it was a trap, I would like to know more. That is interesting information.
That's
Sorry,
just
did you just say trap? Tell me more.
Again, that's just like a failure of those officers. You're not even gonna like hear him out a little bit, right? Like, look into it slightly.
It's like the Empire's mentality has seeped in for so long. That it's like hard for these people to like not just fall into the same kind of cadence that they used to. It's like, oh, well, we're just going to do the treatment like we're told, and it's going to work as we're told, and we're not going to question anything, right? So, there was a line early in the episode from her basically saying it was following orders blindly is what got us in this mess in the first place. Right? And there still seems like there's still a lot of that going on. Another anecdote from Commander Stinger here. To be honest, flashlights aren't the most brightest thing in the dark. I went skinny dipping once in college and was so pale that I was like a lighthouse. Like a translucent baby fish. I was haunting the lake. That is another fun story. Another zinger from Stinger. We'll bring that. I'll have to make a little sound for that.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. I might have one. Let's see.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, cover your ears because it's probably going to hurt your ears. Here we go.
Oh, the gong sound, yeah.
That's right. It's my favorite sound. Or we gotta just do one of these.
That was really loud in my ears.
Yeah, I apologize.
Yeah.
I can't help it. There's nothing I can do about it. Okay, so let's get into the final stretch here. I guess any thoughts on this last moment here, or kind of where we think we're
Um,
going to go with this
yeah, like
Pershing arc?
you're right. Like I think it's quite funny that yeah, that they would just leave her there. And it sucks cuz he's obviously like terrified and feeling really dejected and confused. I'm curious to see like how he comes out of this, if he's going to be like completely fried
Yeah,
or
I'm curious
dead
too.
or what. Um
Right,
yeah,
because
I would
okay, he comes out
assume.
of it like that. It's like, is no one going to be like, well, we should check the tapes and see what happened?
Well, yeah, like
You
what?
know,
Like you can't really fully get away with just frying this guy, but whatever.
well, maybe you can.
Um I guess we'll see like kind of what her motives are, whether they are like if Moff Gideon has escaped, is she trying to get back to him? Is she trying to, like what is her like end game motive here?
Sure.
Because that's not we don't know that yet. So, but yeah, it's an interesting little storyline that we got here.
Yeah, it's just really great. I loved
Mm-hmm.
every moment of this. I thought it was intriguing. There's like all
Yeah,
these different layers, personal, political,
yeah,
motivations. Like just all this stuff was just like really well weaved together.
yeah.
It does feel like that's out of a different show, but that sounds like it's because it is from a different show. So
Yeah.
that's not necessarily surprising.
I feel
But
bad
we,
for the doctor a little bit, but yeah.
yeah, I mean, me too. But we do get more Mando, so let's just quickly touch on that
Yeah.
before because we have to also cover the Bad Batch, and we're
Yeah,
running
I
out of
know.
time here. So, Din, we cut back to Mando, and I like this. I don't mind this structure because it feels like, oh, this stuff took place while they were in transit. Sure, why not? And so Din tells her, her being Bo, that he's taking them to a covert, their Mandalorian covert, and he
Mhm.
is and bringing her as his guest. He does recommend that she keep her helmet on, though, which I think is a fun little moment. She's like, "Yeah, I understand."
Yeah.
She says she's familiar with the old ways and is kind of basically willing to play along here, so that they can kind of collect themselves. They land and they get a kind of a pretty cold greeting. I like how he like stands on his seat and is like, "Where is everyone?" And I feel like they're setting up Paz Vizsla to be like more of a antagonist this season.
I mean, he's already been an antagonist
Yeah,
towards
but he's always been
Mando.
kind of just a bit of a dingus. Like I just feel like
Yeah.
maybe it's a
Like he
he's
wants that dark saber. He wants it real bad.
well the Vizslas, they just
Yeah.
can't help it.
Yeah, exactly. It's in their blood.
So Paz Vizsla at first doesn't want to believe him about his whole redemption thing. Like, sure, you could that could be true, or maybe you're lying. And he's like, well, I'm
Mhm.
not lying. Bo's like, I was there. I saw him do it. It's like, well, we don't trust you either because you used to be a mighty house, but you're also an apostate,
Right,
right?
yeah.
And Mando says, don't worry, I brought proof. And I guess that's enough to convince him. So they let him see the armor. And inside the cave, they are greeted by her, who is, I guess, less skeptical than Paz was,
Yeah.
right? I love how Bo tells her, she's like, listen, I was there to witness it. I saw it. I pulled him out of the lake. It was, it was really crazy. You should have been there. and so the armor takes the vial. I like how by the way, like her line of dialogue here is like, is this true? Her first question to him. It feels
Right.
very casual because usually, like when she's speaking, it feels very formal. She seemed very casual at that moment, which is very different for her. Emily Swallow, great character. I would love to see her face. I don't. I mean, I can look at her actor face here, but I don't. Seems unlikely she will take her helmet off. So she takes the vial of water from Din and puts it, to the test. Right? We see it do that like blue splash thing. And it's like, ooh, okay. So she's like, it's true. He speaks the truth. These are indeed the living waters. Din Djarin, you are redeemed. This is the way. And everyone says, this is the way. And everyone's like, yay. And then surprisingly, Bo is also redeemed, but as we talked about, by technicality. She also was in the water and also hasn't taken off her helmet since. So therefore, she's allowed to join the covert, but she can leave whenever she wants, which I think is a nice like thing. It's like, you can stay, and don't worry, we're not going to keep you here. You can leave whenever you want.
Yeah.
But until then, you're one of us. So it's kind
Yeah.
of it's nice.
It was very yeah, and I think like we said, I kind of said this earlier in the episode, but like I think Bo was really taken back by this and they
Yeah.
just immediately embrace her and start patting her and, it is kind of cool that the armor tells her like, yeah, you can leave at any time. Like it's just so I think that's kind of part of maybe Bo not realizing like, okay, maybe they're not as crazy as I think they are. And
Well, there's a lot of pieces coming together here.
yeah,
In last week's episode, she said, Mando has this, Din has this conversation with her where he's like, I can't believe you follow all this silly stuff, right? And he's like, well, without the creed, what are we,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And she kind of doesn't really believe in that sentiment, but like, okay, now she's seeing Din has it's worked out for him. He has the dark
yeah,
saber. He's somehow awakened the mythosaur, right?
yeah,
And as she looks up, as she's getting pat on the back, she sees the mythosaur signet on the
right,
wall, and I think there's this kind of coalescence of concepts coming together for her, where it's like, yeah, I kind of understand why, or why this is appealing, or why this
right,
could
yeah.
work.
Like they're
Right?
not just stories. It's all that
Yeah.
stuff was true. Like the mythosaur layer was true, and
Right.
that kind of thing. So
So it's
yeah,
giving her like a new kind of sense of purpose a little bit.
yeah.
And
And it's like, what? Your house is blown up. It's better than you just being alone in your castle like you were for
right.
however long,
Sense of
right?
community. We all
Yeah.
need community. So I like, for me, that's the coolest thing, which is like her feeling like maybe that she's finally found a place that she can fit in.
Yeah.
But I think that's not going to be quite as simple as that.
No, I think she'll
And yeah,
struggle a little bit, but I mean, we'll see. We'll see how long she
she also
stays.
says this is the way earlier on in the episode, right? When he's like, "You're not going to
Yeah.
take that helmet off, are you?" And he's like, "This is the way." She's like, "Okay, this is the way."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So I like someone who kind of understands the old ways, doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily believe them, but is kind of being indoctrinated a little bit, but in a good way, in a quote unquote good way,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think what's nice about this is that it's not very clear cut. There's a lot of complexity here. You can see it from both sides, and that but ultimately these are nice people, and they're letting her be a part of it is like kind of this nice message, and
Yeah.
also fits really well into what we're going to talk about next with season 2, episode 13 of the Bad Batch,
Mhm.
Pabu. Any final thoughts on Mando?
No, I like I said, I did enjoy this episode. It was different from where I thought we were gonna go, but yeah, it had a lot of different stuff going on in it, and everything that happened, I was like pretty intrigued by. So it
Yeah,
just leaves
lots
me
going on.
like, yeah, it just leaves me more excited for like what we're gonna see next week. So
Yep, big. I thought this was great. I'm sorry if people didn't like that middle section. I loved it.
yeah.
But if you didn't love it, maybe I helped you like it a little bit more. So, or we helped you like it a little bit more. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to move into the Bad Batch section of
Mhm.
the episode. Actually, we should take a quick break and we'll come back and do that.
Okay. Yeah, quick minute here.
Okay, and we are back, and we're going to be talking about Star Wars The Bad Batch, Season 2, Episode 13, Pabu. The logline here is, "The team takes refuge and finds new allies." Written by Dave Filoni and Jennifer Corbett. Directed by Brad Rao and Stuart Lee. This is an interesting episode, mostly
Yeah.
because it's almost entirely different than episodes we've seen before. And this is like, we've complained about the one-off episodes and kind of why they're not important or why they haven't felt important. This one though feels different to me. What was your sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just again with the show as a whole, the pacing is fucking weird. I can't get over the jumping. Yeah, like we go from this Crosshair episode to this one, and it wasn't as bad as some of the other like jumps that we've gotten, but like just tonally they're so very different between the two episodes. I thought we were still getting into a little bit more of like the meat of this show.
Sure.
But this one didn't feel, not that it didn't feel as meaty. There's definitely some like very interesting things that like are happening with the characters
Yes.
in this episode and like about where they want to go with their lives, right?
Yes.
So that I think is very important. But yeah, it's just odd because I'm waiting for them to bridge these storylines together a little bit more.
Right.
And I
It's
feel
because we
like
talked about that the best stories in the Bad Batch so far this season have not included the Bad Batch, or very light, like very light on including the Bad Batch, right?
Yeah, and I still
So-
kind of feel that way. So I'm like, when are we going to bridge these storylines together, or are
Here's
we
what
at
I
all?
think.
Or
Is going on. Okay. I think the show is struggling with the fact that they included Echo in the season 1, right? And they're like, we can't keep having the Bad Batch putting a young girl in danger every single episode. It just can't. It just doesn't work. And because two things: A, the stakes become all wildly out of whack because there's no way they're killing a little girl in an animated TV show, right? It's just not going to happen. At least not in an action sequence. So it totally robs scenes of pathos, right?
Yeah.
So now they're trying to like figure out what they do with that situation. What they've done largely is tell stories that don't include the Bad Batch that are tangential to that story, right?
Yeah.
And I think they've done really good work in combining those things and making it interesting. Now, the problem becomes how do you square that circle?
Yeah.
This episode I mentioned feels different than things like Faster, which is an episode that we keep referencing, which is funny, but as being like a particular episode that just didn't feel like it mattered, quote unquote.
Well, it did. Yeah.
And it just felt like the definition of a filler episode, which is a term that we generally try to avoid using on this show. Now, this case, I feel like you could say the same thing about this episode, but I think, personally, given where we know the Bad Batch is coming out of this toxic relationship with Sid,
yes,
and being kind of homeless to a large degree, not having anywhere to go, and being introduced to this paradise essentially, right? As kind of showing us what this is all about. What are you guys even fighting for? This is like Hunter kept talking about, well, Echo deserves to have a real life, right? And what does that mean? They haven't been living a normal life.
Oh, you mean Omega?
What did I say?
Echo.
Have I been saying Echo this whole time?
Yeah, you said Echo the first time too, but
man, I've meant Omega.
Yeah.
I have been meaning Omega. Can I go and fix that? Can I like
just tell
the computer, hey, replace Echo with Omega the whole last time? Sorry about that. So Omega deserves a life, right? And what does that actually look like? This is what that actually looks like, right? And I mentioned in our review of Mando that these shows have made me paranoid because we're not used to our characters having nice things, right? Or getting to have these nice moments, and of course in this episode it is kind of like what a coincidence that you guys would arrive the same day that a massive tsunami hits.
Yeah.
Which is like, feels like, okay, well, you needed some sort of like there to be some sort of something exciting going on.
Yeah.
But I almost think it would have been more compelling if they had just committed to the everything is great here scenario, which they almost do. They almost do, because this is not they don't bring the Empire with them. It's just kind of like, clearly that island was designed to sustain or survive these types of tidal waves. Because
for sure.
They said it hasn't happened for 30 years, but in this case, they obviously built a whole wall system for this to protect them. So, like, it's a naturally occurring thing that they have to fight. And sure, there's some damage, but no lost life. And they're kind of at the very end, jump to the end. It's like they, both Tech and Hunter, who are kind of taking over the kind of joint leadership of this kind of group, come to an agreement. They're saying like, we should stay and we should help these people and we should rebuild. And it's like not a military mission, and it doesn't involve their skills as soldiers. It's a human thing. And so that's, I think, really interesting. And this is why the episode largely works. It is, in comparison to last week, not as compelling and it's not as exciting. And I get that. I certainly get that.
Yeah. That's kind of the only thing of that where I have trouble is like linking them together, and like it feels like I'm watching two shows sometimes.
Right, but you got
but yeah, but I know what you mean. Like this did have a bit more depth to it. I don't think it was a filler episode or anything like that. I do think they're getting into more serious stuff with the Bad Batch about like, okay, like where are we going? What are we doing from here? But then it was a little convenient, obviously, for this tsunami wave to happen when they show up. But I think they need a reason to keep them there, and they need a logical reason why they would feel the need to stay.
Well, what's the reason they need them to keep them there, right?
It's like to help rebuild. They're like,
right, but why does the show need them to stay there, in your opinion?
Oh, I don't necessarily think they need them to stay, but I think it's a way of getting us to a point of like, okay, are they gonna, I don't know, giving us maybe this hope or an idea in our heads, like maybe they will stay here forever. Maybe this will be their new home base. Maybe they'll do, instead of working with Sid and doing these kind of dangerous jobs, not that working with the
maybe
pirate
they'll be the protectors of this island or something
less
like
dangerous,
that.
But it's like she kind of goes around collecting these artifacts, right? So it's a little bit more of like, okay, that's kind of a cool theme for them to go on, where it's not military missions and it's not Empire missions or anything like that. It doesn't involve those kind of things. It involves more like archaeology or a little bit more kind of artifacts and helping people get their heritage back, that kind of thing, which is a different way to use the Bad Batch.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of possibilities. I wasn't as bummed about this as I think others were. So back to our weekly segment, IMDb reviews.
Yeah.
So this is from Posey Fan, and this is a 5 out of 10 review. It's actually worse than the Mando review. I get it with this episode. I didn't really get it with Mando. I feel like people need to give this Star Wars a little bit of slack here, in my opinion. But let's find out. Here's the title. So what was the point? The difference between this episode and last week's is mind-boggling. Forget the Bad Batch. Just give me a series about the Empire and the Remnant clones. Those have proven to be the best the series has given us. I care a lot about the supposed crumbling usefulness of the clones. I don't care much about Sid and the fruitlessness of bounty missions.
Mm-hmm.
This one was a little different, but it was basically a vacation episode. Not only that, but the tonal differences between this week and last is vast. It's not very cohesive, if you ask me. So I think that's fair from a kind of a season pacing standpoint.
That's kind of how I feel about it too, but I probably wouldn't be as harsh with the 5 out of 10.
Right. I hope that the last 3 episodes give us something fantastic. Bring us back Crosshair, Cody, Rex, Echo, and the Empire. Include the Bad Batch in an interesting way. Give them some more development. I mean, I think they're voicing a lot of season-long frustrations.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. But personally, I think this episode is serving a purpose. I think it's going to play a much bigger role in going forward. This location is going to fill a much bigger role going forward, and they're either going to be sacrificed. The Pabu people are either going to be sacrificed and fridged, basically, and that's would be terrible. But he brings up this idea of a vacation episode. Again, I also don't think that's bad. I think for these characters, this idea of having a moment to take a breath is valuable and also nice for us to be able to, now, for me, I can now watch this episode as a Bad Batch fan and be like, because I spent the whole time on edge. What's gonna go wrong? What's the danger looking around the corner? And it's like, there really isn't any. And I think that's like a nice change of pace. I understand. I feel like maybe you could reorganize the episodes in the season to fit a little bit better together.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't, that episode last week with Echo could have really happened almost any time. You could move things around and kind of rejigger things to kind of make the pacing fit a bit better. But largely speaking, I'm not too broken up about this episode.
No, I think I think it had a purpose. Yeah, it's. I wouldn't really even call it a vacation episode because they are trying to they're trying to get away from Sid, right? And that's kind of the main purpose of showing up at this place, right? Too. But yeah, I found it. Sorry, my brain just.
Sounds it boring?
Yeah, I get what you mean about like you're being on edge because I'm like, oh,
Right.
what's the big bad that the Batch are gonna end up bringing to this island and fucking it all up for everybody? Because that's kind of what
Right.
we're used to, and it was nice to see that that didn't happen and they got a
Well,
chance.
also, it's like, how would they find how would they even be found here? You know what I mean? I think
Right,
that's the other
yeah.
thing. It's like this does feel like a sanctuary. The other thing that's funny about this is like this is an island, like it's literally an island, right?
Mhm.
And that feels like intentional, but at the same time, most of these places they go to on these remote planets might as well be an island, right? Because
Yeah.
they're far away and not connected to other cities on the planet often, and in this case everyone is situated like in the exact same place, but this could be like a town and any backwater planet,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Without the need for the water to be literally around the whole thing. I do like the island vibes. I think that they called it in the Screen Crush thing, they called it Space Greece, which is funny.
What?
Like Greece, like the
The
Greek
movie?
islands. No.
Oh, okay. I was
Yeah.
sorry.
That's funny.
Yes. I was like,
but also like
yeah.
it looks like it was maybe built on a volcano, so that's kind of cool too.
Right? Yeah.
And the other kind of piece of it is like, of course, I lived on an island for several years. There is a bit of an element of like a slower pace of life.
Yeah.
And it's pretty nice. I kind of miss it. So anyway, that's neither here nor there.
I always
think
forget
it fits
you
well
did
with
that.
this tone. Yeah, I just disappeared for 5 years. or 4
Yeah.
years,
Was
whatever
it that long?
Yeah, it was 4 years. Mm-hmm.
Holy shit. Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into this. We are already at almost 2.5 hours, so we gotta fly through this piece here. So okay, we start with where was it? Let's back up here. We start with a location on a mystery planet. We don't know where we are, but this is a cool piece of trivia. I guess it's technically an Easter egg, but a much broader one. So in the opening scene, I'm just reading this right from IMDb, but it was referenced already, but I knew this already. In the opening scene, the 3 Arabesh signs outside the bar all translate to Club Lao Che, referencing the opening sequence of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, in which Indiana Jones met a character named Lao Che at Club Obi-Wan.
Oh.
So, yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and it's like the whole opening scene plays out very similarly to the way that opening scene plays out. So the Temple of Doom being a kind of big reference point here in this episode. And, to be honest, this episode does have this opening action sequence, which is pretty cool. So say what you will about the rest of it. But
yeah, I have some thoughts on this opening action sequence. But
okay, yeah.
No, you do your you do your thing first.
Okay, we see a bar in a dingy neighborhood, Club Lao Che. The Batch are with Fee again. I actually really been coming to really like Wanda Sykes' Fee.
I like Fee. I'm liking her too.
She's growing on me. And her and Omega are making a deal with a criminal named Crowder for some sort of like jade artifact scenario. And they strike a deal, and then he tries to poison him, which is also a reference to Indiana Jones. And to poison her, sorry.
Right, yeah.
And there's also the distinction reminder of the distinction between pirate and liberator of ancient wonders.
Yes.
Right? So that's important to remember.
Very different.
And then this Crowder character tries to use that worm. I think it's the same creature, that worm thing that they try to use to kill Padme in episode 2.
It's like a creepy little centipede-looking worm with a stinger tail.
Yeah, with a stinger thing on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Highly dangerous, right? So he releases that from like underneath the table. Also kind of a cool move.
Very scummy. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Very cool bad guy move.
Right. And meanwhile, Hunter is in disguise sitting at a table like nearby. And he senses that this critter is like, because he's got a, I think Ryan Airy in Screen Crush called him Star Wars version of Daredevil, which is kind of funny, and it's kind of true. So he like senses this critter and uses his knife to like stab it off her shoulder, which is really badass. Like, no question, super cool.
Yeah.
And then there's like a whole like gunfight breaks out, right? I love Omega does this cool like slide roll over the table flip thing. It's really cool.
Omega kills a guy.
Does she? What?
Yes.
No.
Yes. I when I saw it, I was like, she just killed that guy.
You're like, let me back up.
Full blown with her.
Are you talking about that dropping that thing on that guy?
No, before that, with her bow, snipes a guy in the chest.
Stunner. It's a stunner. It's a stun thing. It's not a kill. It's a stun.
Are you sure that thing stuns?
I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure. I don't know.
I don't know.
I feel like that's the excuse that they're going to use.
That he's stunned and not dead.
She might have
killed somebody. Because I'm like, that is like a 12-year-old killing people now?
She might have killed somebody. Yeah, but she's not a normal 12-year-old.
I know, but like we're all worried about like we were just talking about they're putting we can't keep putting this child in dangerous situations.
Right.
Like, oh, you mean at the start of this episode when she murders someone?
Yeah, and she's like very capable, obviously, and they even talk about it like, oh yeah, her training's paying off.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just like proud of her. They're like, oh yeah. So I'm like, okay, maybe she stunned him, but I don't know. Where did she get that bow from?
For the sake of that show, she got it from season 1.
She steals it from somebody, and I'm pretty sure it's like a weapon. It's not just like a stunning weapon.
Didn't she get it from the episode where they're transporting Nucci?
I think so. Like from those cat people, like from the slavers or something, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily. I think she killed that guy.
Yeah,
I think they just showed a child murderer.
For the sake of this show, let's assume that that's the case. For our own
wild.
So, and then, she does that cool flip over the table thing, and then like shoots the chain on that giant bell. I thought that was just a cool move.
That was
really
cool.
That.
Yeah,
I was like, go get him.
I was just like,
Omega.
whoa. I was like, okay, they're just shooting up this bar, and she just maybe killed someone, but all right. And they're just all casual after being like, yeah, look at that training. Good job.
Yeah. So they I like, by the way, there's a whole line of like, you should have brought more muscle, and then like Wrecker's like, she did, which is so good. So then anyway, this gunfight breaks out. They call Tech, who's playing like some sort of like card game against himself on top of Gonki, talking to himself, or I guess talking to Gonki, right?
Yeah, he's talking to Gonki.
And he says that's the only time it's challenging, which is funny. And so anyways, they need to pick up. So he flies off. The rest of them, meanwhile, use smoke grenades to clear a path out. They get the money and the artifact, so they get to keep both. And Tech lands the ship right in the street, which is also badass in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then they take off, and it's like, oh well, that could have, that went pretty well. Any other thoughts on this opening sequence?
Oh no, nothing other than it just being wild that you took
somebody. Yeah.
Full-blown child to a deal with shady criminals.
Yeah.
And then she maybe or not killed a guy, but
maybe she's kind of filling in that kind of that role, that
crosshair role.
No, it's got Temple of Doom. In Temple of Doom, they've got what's his name in that movie? He just won an Oscar for Best Actor.
I forget his name in the movie. I do know what you're talking about.
Short Round. Yeah.
Short Round, yes.
Yeah. She's playing that role here.
Yeah, I was like, okay, Bad Batch, just all right.
I see you.
I see you, yeah.
Okay, so on the ship, they're in hyperspace, and they're just kind of chatting about how, wow, that mission was a lot of fun. And I was like, I agree. Meanwhile,
just killed a bunch of people.
Yeah. Oh, I saw that. You might want to lay low for a while.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Fee talks about how Omega needs to expand her skill set outside of her military training, and that maybe friends her own age might help. And I really love, by the way, this like comic gold where Tech is like, well, we never had any of that. I don't see the issue.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you wouldn't.
Yeah, you wouldn't because you're a fucking robot.
Yeah.
Also, don't think we didn't notice that Tech and Fee were like giving each other the eyes in this episode.
Oh yeah, I know.
There's some real chemistry.
Doesn't Wrecker say something to him too?
Yes, he does.
About her
later.
You
got some competition.
Yeah. It's like, oh, we're shipping Fee and
Well, the show is shipping him. I'm not even. I mean, like, I wasn't even thinking about it. I mean, I guess it makes sense. She called him Brown Eyes the first time. That's kind of a compliment, right?
Yeah, it's funny because he's like the most emotionally
unintelligent.
Yeah, one. So like, I like it that they're trying to like push him into a relationship. It's funny.
Yeah. Because like I feel like Hunter's the obvious one, but it's too obvious.
That's way too obvious. Yeah,
it's too obvious. Okay, so they get a transmission from Sid, and she says, and this is pre-recorded. This is not like a live communication. It's been 20 rotations with no word. I guess that means it's been like almost a month. Yeah. Their absence has cost them a few scores, and she's basically saying, "Don't forget about our mutually beneficial arrangement. We know a lot about each other. Don't think I'm just threatening you." Right? So, yeah, she's basically saying, "I will sell you out if you're not dead." Which you better be dead, which is a kind of funny thing to say. She did say, "Don't come back if you don't have anything valuable." Right? And they didn't get anything valuable from that ship. So what are you going to do? You know? I do think so. A couple things here. I love how the like transmission itself is kind of like not that great, so it sounds even scarier. Like her voice octaves like drop a little bit in certain places to kind of like give it a little bit of extra menacing flair to it. And then I also like how Fee was like, "Oh, I didn't realize you cut ties with Sid," and they're like, "Well, we kind of did.
We kind of haven't."
I like our mutually beneficial arrangement wasn't beneficial mutually. Yeah. So she's like, "Well, I get it." She's like, "I've known Sid a long time, but you should kind of really have a plan if you're gonna cut her loose, right?"
Yeah, you can't just ghost her.
Yeah, and I was gonna say they literally just ghosted her.
Yeah,
what a hilarious move! I just think that's such a funny idea for them to. It's like, well, what if they just never called her?
Yeah.
Right? I just think it's good. That's really funny. I've no issue with that because it's just like these guys don't really know how to deal with these types of situations. So
no,
sure, why not? They're just going to avoid the problem until they have to deal with it. Anyway, Fee has an idea where they can go hang out and lay low, and gives the coordinates to Brown Eyes, and that's kind of like the first little bit of flirting that they're doing in this episode. Okay, so they get to Pabu, which is the name of the episode, which we're like, what could that possibly mean? There was no way to know. It's the name of a planet. And it's a lovely planet. It's gorgeous. Like the most beautiful, pristine, like this like blue-green water and this tall mountain with like this like very ornate structures on it. It's beautiful. And I also another example of how good the show can look. Although there's an example of how kind of not so great the show can look later, so we'll get to that. So this is her home away from home and her sanctuary. And so it's not where it's her home away from home. So where she lives exactly is not clear, but she comes here a lot. We get to see the Archeum, which is a really cool word in my opinion. That's built into the top of the mountain. I think we hear the warning system later, which sounds like a foghorn.
Yeah.
Burm, I think it's a natural, like there's no technology there. I think it's been there a long, long time. It's kind of one of those things where Star Wars brings old and new together really well.
Okay.
And that like when those earthquakes happen, I think it's because it's on a volcano, and that's because there's a shift in pressure or something within the volcano that makes that sound come out.
Maybe.
So I think that's kind of cool. Again, slightly bored from the Screen Crush recap, but having rewatched the episode and really thinking about it as a volcano, which a capped volcano potentially, I think that's really cool.
A very dangerous place to put a whole town, but
yes, but they don't know that, I don't think. Right? it could be a Pompeii situation, which could be another tragedy, which we don't necessarily want to have.
Isn't Hawaii also like all volcanoes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they're not like on top of them.
No,
necessarily, right? So. Okay, so we also learn that by the way, Archeum is the place where she keeps all her artifacts, and we don't see the inside of it. I guess we'll probably see the inside of it before the end of the season. And I don't know where they got that word from. Again, it's just a very cool structure. But
archive.
Yeah, archive, Archeum. Yeah, all right, fair enough. Yeah, I'm just saying, like, I don't know where, like, I've never heard that word for, like, is it always been called that on Pabu? Was it the Pabuans that named it? I don't know. We find out a couple things about Pabu. We find out that it's mostly made up of refugees from the Clone Wars, which is a kind of probably a feeling that would be relieving to the Bad Batch, right? They're also refugees to a certain degree.
For sure, yeah.
And that the artifacts that Fee is collecting are maybe not worth a lot of money necessarily, but they are pieces of the culture from these different people that live on Pabu, and that means a lot to them. So that's nice. We are introduced to Shep and Liana, two new characters. Shep is played by Imari Williams, and Liana is played by Andy Allo. Liana Hazard is her name. I didn't know her name.
Sick name.
And Shep Hazard, which is also really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no notes there.
Yeah.
Steve
Doesn't
Blum,
she call
by the
her
way.
Auntie Fee?
Yeah, but I think that's kind of like a.
Oh, okay.
I think that's kind of like a term of endearment in this case.
Maybe, yeah.
Right. So, Steve Blum voices that criminal from earlier in the episode.
Okay.
He's also the voice of Zeb from.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
So just a little nod there to back to more Star Wars stuff. So we meet Shep. These are just like the most nicest people, right? They're like, "Hey, welcome to our home. Please come, stay, make yourself at home. Stay as long as you like. Eat our food. Date our women or whatever you need to do. Like it's just like the most nicest thing, and it just completely again showing what are the stakes of the Empire, right? What are they eating up and destroying? Things like this, the nicer things. So, by the way, the specter of the Empire is not lost on this. Later at dinner, Hunter says, "Are you not worried about the Empire coming?" And
right.
And he's like, "Well, no. Like, why would they come here, right? But there's two possibilities: they'll come anyway, just because they can, or the Bad Batch will lead them there, unintentionally, obviously."
Yeah, because he kind of just says like, we don't have any resources. It's just they're very self-sufficient. They're basically like a fishing village. But
yeah, where do they get all this fruit and stuff though?
I don't know, trees that grow on the
right.
island.
Sure.
Island trees.
Yeah, it just seems like most of the space is taken up by housing. So she says that when we get introduced to Fee, and Fee, by the way, so he's like, "Hey, these are my friends." Liana is the same age as Omega, so it's like, saying, "Hey, she needs a friend. Here's a friend." Shep being kind of this patriarch of the town. Liana mentions how, she never brings her friends here, and then it's like, there's a little bit of like a wink to the audience, right? Like, oh, what does that mean? What could that possibly mean?
Yeah.
It's a sign that she thinks highly of the Bad Batch, and that she believes that Omega she also believes that Omega deserves a life, and that they do too, and that this could be one for them. It's just, to me, it's like an entirely like selfless act to bring these people here.
Yeah.
And then to like,
yeah, and it's kind of like she's giving them a taste of what their life could be.
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, like because she goes there all the time, but she also does other things. She doesn't spend all of her time on this island, but she goes back to it, and that's kind of her.
But maybe it could be their home base,
Well, yeah, exactly. So it's like it's giving them a taste of like what a normal life could be for them and for Omega, because it's even though they mentioned a few times when Omega's like running around with the daughter, not the daughter, Liana there, and like they're giggling and having a good time, and like they say they haven't heard her laugh like that in a long time.
That also was a nice moment. Yeah, it's like this episode's full of these nice little moments, right?
Yeah.
And that these just normal little small moments of life that I think can be taken for granted. I think that's why this episode is important. So they get invited to dinner, and we get some like glory shots of the island. We get to see more of the beauty, and then we get to learn about the distinction between Upper and Lower Pabu. Upper Pabu is very old, and then because they started adding more and more people, they needed to expand to Lower Pabu, which is below the wall. So at dinner, we get introduced to some monkey critters. They get a name, but I can't remember what they are.
Yeah.
And
they're cute, though.
Yeah, they're cute enough. And we hear more about this whole refugee situation. And then there's this really striking line where Shep says to Hunter, as a father, you couldn't ask for a better place to raise a child. And at no point does he correct him.
Yeah.
And he just kind of, I think, really takes that in and like takes it at face value. And again, it's just like these slow moments that I think really solidify characters and can in the long run. And it's just why when people get annoyed with these types of moments, I think it's really it's these moments that make you care about them later when their life's on the line. So this is Fee kind of like drops the kind of charade at this point. She's like, this would be a great place for you guys to stay, and it says a little stability might do you all some good.
Well,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more. I just want this for them. I want this life for them so bad. Like,
right?
You know what
yeah.
I mean? Yeah. We get a lot of like soft and warm lighting, with like the score carrying a lot of woodwinds, flute and stuff like that, and it's very nice and very idyllic. Any other thoughts on kind of this kind of dinner sequence?
No, it just, even for Star Wars, the food looked really good.
Oh yeah, it's true.
I was like, man, that food looks good.
Yeah, and also I love the part where Wrecker's full.
Yeah.
And then Tech makes a joke. Oh, let me mark the time and date.
Yeah.
To
so
mark the
funny.
occasion.
Yeah.
That's so good. And then there's even dessert, which of course features a Meluron.
Right.
Fruit.
Oh, of course. And it's just like obviously from what they've probably been eating, which is just those crappy like rations and all that, right? Like the Bad Batch getting this little taste of paradise is probably so nice for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely. And I I love Rutger's like, I love this place, which is a stark distinction from the I hate this planet.
Right, yeah.
From a couple episodes ago. We also find out that they have a boat. I always think that boat, I find boats in Star Wars to be very funny because if you have everything can fly, like why do you need a boat? And the word boat also feels very like old school. It's just one of those things that you don't think about boats in Star Wars very often, personally.
I guess so, that's true. But you can't use big, loud airships when you're fishing, Julian. Jeez.
Yeah, this is true. But you could like land it in the water. I don't know.
That's true.
So they're sitting there watching the sunset, and the plan is that Liana is going to take Omega out on the boat to watch the sunset from the water. And there's this like brief moment where she's like, "Can I go? Can I go?" And Hunter's like, "Yeah, okay, have fun." And again, these small moments which I think are lovely. They're a family in this moment, and that's nice. So Omega and Liana head out on the boat, and there's this nice view of the island. Omega is kind of closing her eyes and smelling the seawater, and then she talks about how she's like, I grew up surrounded by water, which is funny because I think that is a direct callback to the line from Book of Boba Fett, where Boba Fett says the same thing. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Yeah, so in like I think it's one of the first episodes of Book of Boba Fett where he's sitting on the throne and he's like talking to one of the people who came to like offer him tribute, and he's like, I think they're talking about how Tatooine used to be a water planet and all that stuff, and he's like, I grew up on a water planet or whatever.
Oh, okay,
right?
yeah.
I think it's very similar to that because obviously he's also referencing Kamino, and she's referencing Kamino here as well. But she said, it was never like this; it was very different. And of course, obviously, you think about Kamino, it's raining all the time. Like I think the only time we saw it not raining was that one scene at the end of Bad Batch season 1. So,
yeah,
just saying, it was raining all the time. There's not really sunsets. And it's a military installation or a lab, so it's not really the same feeling as being on vacation on a boat. And I gotta be honest, man, I was jealous. It took me back to watching a sunset on a boat, and it's really hard to beat watching a sunset on a boat.
Oh, I'm
and
sure
smelling the seawater and like this is such a new experience for her, and it's like I'm just I'm happy for Omega here to kind of understand kind of how regular people live, So she says that they never stay anywhere very long. She's like, that's just not how we kind of roll. And this is confusing to Liana, who's like, oh, really? Well, that must get lonely. And it's something that I think Omega has never really thought about because she's like, well, I have the Batch, and they're my family.
Yeah.
But I think she realized, she's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, there is more to life than being on the run all the time. And
Yeah.
That is kind of lonely. And so some of these kind of ideas start settling in, and I find that to be like, again, this character work and kind of self-reflection moments that we get in this episode to be like very worthwhile.
Yeah, I think so too.
So anyway, they start kind of hanging out, and we go back to dinner, and Fee shows Tech a nice view as the lights of the island all come on at the same time. I thought there was going to be like some cool sunset thing, to be honest, but it was just like the lights turning on, which I thought was kind of funny. Anyways, they all watch the sunset. It's very lovely, and everyone's having a nice time. There's a little bit of like touching, again, more flirting going on here. Hunter notices, though, that the monkeys are acting strangely and senses something is off.
Right.
The music cuts out, and he says something about something is coming, but then they're hit by a tremor and he's cut off. They're like, oh, don't worry, it's just a small tremor. It's normal. It happens on the island. Just it's normal island life stuff. And then on the boat, they kind of say the same thing. Oh, yeah, it's normal. Don't worry about it. But to be safe, they start to head back to shore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hunter calls in on them to say, hey, everything good? She's like, yep, we're heading back. Don't worry. We'll be fine. So people, are kind of getting back on their feet and kind of dusting themselves off when another tremor hits, and this one's much bigger. And Tech warns of an imminent sea surge. So basically a tsunami.
Which is a tsunami, right? Yeah, because that's what
Yeah.
happens with tsunamis is because of earthquakes, right?
Yes.
And like tremor shifts. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, so there's when the kind of the tectonic plates move, that's what an earthquake is.
Yeah.
It changes. I don't know exactly how this works. I'm not a earthquakeologist, but it shifts something in under the ocean, and it shifts the ocean so that it has to fill that space.
Right.
And then once that space is filled, it kind of resets itself very quickly, but the water rushes back to fill the space it left.
Right.
So
yeah. So it pulls back from the shore and then comes like flying back in. Yeah.
Yes.
That'd be so. I think that's probably one
terrifying.
of the like natural disasters that I would be the most scared of.
Because you need to get high. You need to get to high ground as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
Then the water usually lingers for a while, so it's dangerous.
Yeah, I am not a good swimmer, so I'm like anything else. It's like okay, like hurricanes and tornadoes, like go hide in a basement. I'm like okay, yeah, but like a tsunami, I would die. Like that is just not. Yeah, I don't know how people live on coastal areas where those could happen because that's terrifying.
Right. We got another zinger from Stinger here. He says like hand holding. Let's keep it PG, please. I presume he's talking about the two lovebirds in this episode.
Yes. Fee and Goggles.
Right. And he also mentions that this is why you need a boat. But, of course, also, it didn't help them in this case. No. Although, I gotta be honest, when the boat crashed, I thought that was a little underwhelming. It just kind of like, bunk, like lands on top of the... They could have just easily stayed on the boat and would have been fine.
I was thinking the same thing. Like, you could have just stayed on that boat. But I found that cool that, like, the water pulled. I don't know if this actually happens or not, but I would assume so.
Well, it depends on how the tide stuff works, but yeah.
Yeah, but that it pulled all the way back that they could literally run on where the like.
Although it would be for sure very soggy, and it would be very hard to run on.
Yes, yeah, probably. But I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is super
also
cool.
terrifying.
Yeah. So I like how Shep is like, well, I wouldn't worry unless the alarm goes off, and then the alarm goes off. Which I think is funny. So they all jump into action, right? So they need to evacuate Lower Pabu, and Hunter's gonna like, okay, I'm gonna go to the ship to get Omega, and you guys kind of help out down here. So the water starts receding, which prevents Omega and Liana from like making any progress on their boat. And we talked about this. They jump off and they start running. Love a tidal wave. I just have love a good tidal wave. So. They're trying to outrun a tidal wave, which never really works out well.
No.
But you have to at least try, right? And I just kind of like looked at the TV and I said, "Run!" Right?
Yeah.
You just gotta run, like just get out of there, right? She calls Hunter for help. He's like, keep your transponder on. I'm on my way. Meanwhile, Shep and Wrecker are checking on every home, which I feels like you don't have time to check on every home,
right?
To be honest, but. Luckily, they do. They're like, oh, okay, don't worry. This is the last one.
The sweet old man.
The old man from earlier in the episode, Mr. Inta, I think is his name. And he's like, what's going on? And they just pick him up. And they go
Wrecker just scoops him. So cute.
It's funny, and then they make a break for it. So Fee and Tech, meanwhile, deploy rescue ladders to help get people up the wall faster. Right? They needed something to do, so he gets to use his grapnel gun and jump up there, and then
well, he gets to be the hero.
Use these ladders. He gets to be the hero, which is kind of cool. And it just, I don't know. I guess the idea is that there's too much of a bottleneck on the stairs, so then they need to be able to get up faster. Although I feel like climbing up ladders is not that quick either. But
no.
So anyway, the siren / foghorn goes off again. I just love the sound of that deep bassy burn sound.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Hunter reaches the ship and starts heading out to get Omega. Liana trips and Omega, stops to help her up. She's like, "You have to keep going." Hunter gets there just in time and deploys the line, rope. Now, you got one chance to catch that rope or you're dead.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know how well that would work, to be honest, but sure.
I thought he was gonna fly right down and leave the back thing open that they could hop on.
Yeah,
right?
that would have made sense. That's cool.
But they're not Jedi.
They don't have a back door, do they? It would be helpful if they did.
They have a landing door for sure.
Yeah, but that's on the side.
Oh, I don't know. Whatever. They have I guess one that comes out of the bottom. Don't they have a platform that comes out of the bottom of the ship?
Comes out the side of the ship.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Right.
All right, I guess throwing a rope was the only way to do it.
Yeah, I guess. Anyway, I just thought it was funny how they hopped on with no concern at all. Anyway, they escape the tidal wave, and everyone's happy. Meanwhile, Wrecker, the old man, and Shep climb up the ladder at the last second. Wrecker helps Shep just before he can fall. He falls into the water. The water crashes into the wall, and we see the water recede, and we kind of see how much destruction it's caused. I didn't love the visual effects of the water, to be honest. I thought the tidal wave looked cool, but as it pulled back, it kind of looked weird to me. So I don't know. That's nitpicky at the most. Fine, but I just want to because we're so used to saying how good the show looks.
That's true. Yeah.
In this case, it didn't look that good in that part to me. So the next day, all the people are gathered in a square at the top of Pabu. Wrecker, Liana, and Omega are napping under a tree. It's very quaint. The wreckage is even worse in the light. It looks like all of Lower Pabu is basically destroyed. But as they mentioned, there is no loss of life. Everyone got out, and it was just property that was destroyed. And they're like, it doesn't matter. We can rebuild. Everything's fine, right? We're an industrious people. Tech comes in. He's like, it estimates it's going to take several rotations to repair all this damage, right? This is kind of like his initial volley into we should stay and help.
Yeah,
is very his style. Hunter and Tech, I guess, both had the same idea, and they agreed to stay behind and help them rebuild. And we get that last line from Shep, which is, "You would be most welcome." So again, this sense of safety and community and stuff is never really something that these people have had.
Right.
We get exposed to it for the first time, and they get exposed to it for the first time in this episode, and it's, I think, necessary character work, and world building for the show, because the next 3 episodes I think are going to be quite harrowing. Is my belief.
Yeah.
It's possible that the next one might be a bit of a similar to this one. It's called Tipping Point. But then after that, we got both episodes on the 29th, the Summit and Plan 99, which I think we can both agree are going to likely cover Mount Tantus, and Crosshair's going to be back and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, next week's a bit of a mystery, but I think after that, I don't even know how we're going to cover those, to be honest. That's going to be tough. A back-to-back. I mean, hopefully the Mando episode's only 20 minutes.
Yeah, we'll see how that works.
Yeah.
It's going to be a 4-hour episode.
We're already at pushing 3,
I
so
know.
We should wrap it up. Any final thoughts on the Bad Batch here?
No, I mean, it was nice to see them maybe seeing a different way of life for themselves, and to see them getting away from Sid. So obviously that still also has to get wrapped up somehow. But
yes,
yeah. So we shall see what happens in the next couple episodes with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's still going to sell them out, so that's almost certainly what's going to happen. But we shall see indeed, and it would be their own bed. They made that bed; they're going to have to lie in it. There's a better way to cut ties with Sid than the way they did it. So let this be a lesson: don't ghost people. On that note, we will wrap things up. Remember, we record this live every Thursday, around 7, 8 o'clock Central Time. come join the conversation like Commander Stinger. Throw some Stinger zingers in there for us. That would be fun. And if you prefer, you can always listen to this as a podcast. This is on every regular podcast feed, iTunes, etc., Spotify. Leave a review there at whichever is your favorite podcast player of choice. It does help the show quite a bit. And if you want to help the show financially, which is the best way, in my opinion, to help the show, you can go over to patreon.com/TowerBabbleCast and help support the show there and get some bonus content for your trouble and access to the Discord. On that note, we'll be back next week with Season 3, Episode 4 of The Mandalorian and Season 2, Episode 14 of The Bad Batch. Until then, may the Force be with you.